Good evening, everyone. I'm calling the September 6th City Council meeting to order. And as a reminder, we continue to have a remote aspect to all of our meetings. Both staff and members of the public may be participating in tonight's meeting remotely via WebEx. We have an excused absence this evening. Councilmember Ray is unable to join us. And the first item on the agenda this evening is the Pledge of Allegiance, and I invite you to join myself and the council. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. It's exciting to come back from our summer break because we have a jam-packed agenda full of great public items tonight. So thank you all for joining us. And for those at home, we have a very big crowd with us tonight. Under special business, we have several proclamations we're going to do this evening. ID 1153, Constitution Day Proclamation. ID 1256, the Hispanic Heritage Month Proclamation. And ID 1266, Eastside Welcoming Week Proclamation. So I will be over at the lectern and I will call up each group individually, introduce you, read the proclamation, and invite you to, if you have any comments you'd like to share with the group. First up is Constitution Day Proclamation, which sounds strange, but this is really about how we can provide some recognition to our court. So we're pretty excited to do this tonight. I'd like to invite Judge Stewart and Court Administrator Christy Shorn and any other court staff that we have with us this evening to come on up for the staff here and Christy and Judge over there, and we want to recognize you on camera. I believe we have Kathy Koski, Georgia Dapping, Melanie Vanek, Nikki Meister, Julie Pallon, Dominic Deathman, and Marisol Visser. Thank you all so much for coming this evening. I will start with the proclamation, Judge, and then offer you some time at the mic. Thank you very much. Whereas the United States Constitution has shaped the progress, values, and laws of this country, Washington State, and the city of Issaquah, and whereas September 17th is commonly known as Constitution Day and Citizenship Day to commemorate the signing of the U.S. Constitution in Philadelphia on September 17th, 1787, and whereas National Constitution Day was developed to honor the principles of the Constitution and striving towards a more perfect nation, and Citizenship Day is recognized to welcome and celebrate new citizens of the United States in our community, and whereas the city of Issaquah strives to embody the values espoused in the Constitution, empower citizens to participate in government, and abide by its laws and promise. And whereas the Issaquah Municipal Court plays a vital role in upholding the Constitution, establishing and maintaining public trust and confidence through jurisprudence and consistent service to the Issaquah community, including the delivery of court services to the city of Duval, North Bend, and Snoqualmie. And whereas the Issaquah Municipal Court has introduced innovative, problem-solving approaches to better serve the common welfare and abide by the ideals of the Constitution. And whereas it is appropriate to acknowledge and thank Issaquah Municipal Court staff on this celebration of the 235th anniversary of the Constitution signing. Now, therefore, I, Mary Lou Pauley, Mayor of the City of Issaquah, do hereby proclaim September 17th, 2022 to be Constitution Day in the City of Issaquah, and I invite the community to join me in thanking the Issaquah Municipal Court employees for their service and outstanding contributions and the vital role they play in upholding the Constitution. Thank you very much. Come on up. And Christy as well, if you'd like to say a few words. That's great.
Notice how quickly my staff moves away from the microphone. Mayor Pauley, Council, thank you for recognizing us as the Constitution Day approaches on September 17th. We truly appreciate it. And I want to emphasize to you all how important it is to the court staff that we uphold the principles of the Constitution, and not only the United States Constitution, but the Washington Constitution and all of the laws that exist to protect the citizens, both of Issaquah and the visitors that come into Issaquah that end up inside of our court. Really quickly, I'll go through and tell you what folks do. Christy Shorn, to my immediate left, is our court administrator. We went through when we lost Ms. Campo a couple of years ago, we went through a pretty healthy interview process, and Christy came out at the top. And I'll tell you something, Christy's been a court administrator for what, 3 years now? 2 years into it, I got a call from a court administrator who's a former president of the DMCMA, which is the District Municipal Court Judges Management Association for the state of Washington, and another member telling me that they were in the process of drafting Christy Shorn to be the court administrator of the year. And the judges throughout the state, court administrators throughout the state, all petitioned, put in their words of confidence, and that she should be the one and be recognized for all she's done for the state of Washington. And she is not court administrator of the year. And the reason she is not is you have to be a court administrator for 5 years. And at the point that she was nominated, she'd only been a court administrator for 2 years. But I want you to recognize how important she is, not just the city of Issaquah, but the city of state. She's the go-to person for the state of Washington. To her immediate left, and this is hard for me to say because Nikki has been with the court for well over a decade, and since 2009, an ongoing principle between the two of us is I pretend like I don't know who she is. And I have to admit now that her name's Nikki Meister. She's never been in a management position. We went through that entire process, and she came out number 2 for our court administrator. The problem that Nikki had was she had no experience as a court administrator in any type of a management type position. So one of the first things that Christy did was she came in and got us a lead. So Christy's been our lead for a couple years. Nikki's been our lead for a couple years. She does an amazing job. Continuing down, we have Kathy Koski, one of our court clerks. I love Kathy because Kathy's the closest person to my age, so we understand the same music. Songs, all that type of things. We have Georgia. Georgia's been with us a couple years. We stole her from Renton by way of Lakewood. I've known Georgia because I was a public defender in the city of Lakewood, so we've known each other a long time. Julia down there, Julia Pallon, is my right-hand person. She's the one that reminds me when I have search warrants in my inbox at 3 o'clock in the morning. She makes sure I follow up on them. She's making sure that search warrants are signed and the like. Then we have our two newest people down at the end. Three things I want to talk to you about, just I get 3 minutes to do this, is our virtual court, our paperless court, and most importantly, our community court. Issaquah opened a community court. A number of you have come and watched our community court. It's an amazing process. We provide resources. We work in the virtual world, and we have a separate virtual room with all of these resources, DSHS, mental health providers, treatment providers. People zoom in from the community that need these resources. And we were able to apply for a grant. We share Marisol down there with the Human Services Department. Our portion of her salary is paid for by money we got from the state of Washington. We had extra money left over, so we hired Dominique. Dominique works part-time directly for the court. I will tell you that she zooms in on my early calendars. She recognizes folks that are in need of services. Today, just today, on the jail calendar, there was somebody who clearly needed services. Dominique walked from our court over to the jail, went down with the person, met with them, and make sure that they have an opportunity to access the services that they need. With regard to protecting the constitutional rights of folks, I will tell you that, well, first of all, you're in our courtroom. I don't know if you realize that, but this is our courtroom. And when the pandemic hit, you became aware real fast how important those constitutional rights were to the members of the court, not just me, but my staff. The pandemic hit, we recognized it was going to be around a long time, and we were one of the first, I think the first court in King County. There were a couple Thurston County courts that were working along with us that went online. And we went online, and within a month, we were handling virtual court across the board. Christy brought on O-Court, which meant we got rid of the paper documents that we typically did. Everything became digital. And then as the process developed over the last 2 years, we've become essentially a paperless court. We have 98% paperless, I'm told officially today. Everything we do online. What's great about that is when Wally calls out and says, hey, we're social distancing, we got to keep people out of the courthouse for a while. I have a wonderful picture that my right-hand woman down there took of this backdrop here, throw it up behind me, and it looks like I'm in Issaquah, nobody knows any better. I'm able to access all my documents online because we've gone paperless, and essentially we're protecting the rights of folks. We're giving them an open courtroom. We are providing speedy trials. If you read in the paper about how the King County Superior Court is a year, 6 months behind, by May of 2020, we were completely caught up. We're not behind in any jury trials, we're not behind in any court hearings. We're moving and adapting. We're now in a not virtual, but we are in a hybrid situation. Court's completely open. Almost everybody still elects to receive by audiovisual. We utilize Zoom. All the courts are because of a couple of access tools with the Zoom. They're all appearing that way. It allows people to maintain their jobs, people to maintain their employment, still handle their court dates. So We're working hard for Issaquah. I think we're serving the public, and we're thrilled that you have us here. You're always welcome to come to our court. You're always welcome. A number of you come to community court. I gave you a community court bracelet. I encourage you to wear it and show everybody your support. But I appreciate you having us in. We really do. Thank you. Oh, wait, stop. Melanie Vanek is my probation officer. I skipped over the top of her. Since I skipped her, I might ask her to come up and say a few words. So Melanie Vanek, actually, Dominique works directly beneath Melanie. Melanie handles our probation department. Just like Christy, Melanie she's way up in the probation department. Things that I don't even begin to understand. Something called ICAOS, which is a pain in my side. Melanie has the answers. She's an amazing probation officer. We are very lucky to have her in the city of Issaquah. I can't believe that I skipped over the top of her. But you want to say anything, Melanie? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Judge. Can we take a picture? Sure. Please, can we stay for a picture? Well, he's going to do a picture. Oh, did I say something, Christy?
No.
Okay, we're going to do a picture then with the judge. However we jumble it up. So for those that are watching at home, not all cities have a court, and not all cities have a court like our court, which is ahead of the game at almost every single step of the way. And if you have not watched Community Court, please take the judge's words seriously. You have to go see it. It is an amazing thing to watch. So thank you all. Next up, I would like to invite Mariana Garza, Sandra Buzani, Daniela Reveles, Yvette Gomez, Adriana Hernandez, Adriana Chavez, Leticia Figon, from the Latinx Circle to the lectern to receive the proclamation ID 1256 Hispanic Heritage Month Proclamation. Come on up. Some are in transit and may just show up while we're doing this. So thank you all for coming tonight. Whereas each year Americans observe National Hispanic Heritage Month from September 15th to October 15th, celebrating the histories, cultures, and contributions of Americans whose ancestors came from Spain, Mexico, Central America, South America, and the Spanish-speaking nations of the Caribbean. And whereas, according to the 2020 census, the Hispanic population of the United States was 62.1 million people, making people of Hispanic origin the nation's largest ethnic or racial minority, 18.9% of the total U.S. population. And whereas Issaquah's diversity and Hispanic population have increased over the last 30 years from 1990, when 95% of residents were white and only 2% Hispanic Latino, to more recent times, 65.7% of our residents today are white and 9% are Hispanic Latino. And whereas we commit to embracing diversity and inclusion by paying tribute to Hispanic heritage through education, acknowledgement, and celebration within our community. And whereas this year's theme, I'm going to say it wrong, Unidas? Unidas? Thank you very much. Inclusivity for a stronger nation encourages us to ensure that all voices are represented and welcomed to help build stronger communities and a stronger nation, and encourages us to reflect on all the contributions Hispanics have made in the past and will continue to make in the future, and is also a reminder that we are stronger together. So now, therefore, I, Mary Lou Pauley, Mayor of the City of Issaquah, do hereby proclaim September 15th through October 15th, 2022, to be Hispanic Heritage Month in the City of Issaquah, and I urge the community to join in special observance and celebration of Hispanic heritage. And would someone like to come up and make some comments? Thank you.
Hello. Thank you. Hi. Hola. My name is Adriana Hernandez, and I'm a part of the Latino club that we have. And I'm really excited to be here and to announce this official date, which is very special to us. And thank you so much for all the support. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Would you guys like to take a picture? Our third proclamation tonight, ID 1266, is about Eastside Welcoming Week. And I'd like to invite Sophia Hashmi, who's serving as MC at this Friday's Issaquah Welcomes You event, to the lectern to receive the proclamation. Hi, Hashmi. So the proclamation I'm reading today was actually signed by the City of Bellevue, the City of Kirkland, the City of Sammamish, City of Issaquah, and Redmond. And in one of my mayor's meetings this morning, we talked about we need to get a whole bunch more cities signing on to this proclamation. So glad to do this tonight for Issaquah on behalf of all of the cities. Whereas the East Side cities of Bellevue, Issaquah, Kirkland, Redmond, and Sammamish have jointly celebrated Eastside Welcoming Week for the past 6 years, and whereas these cities recognize the importance of ensuring that all residents feel safe, secure, and welcome, and whereas East King County is one of the most racially and ethnically diverse regions in Washington state, with over 30% of our residents coming from places outside of the United States, and whereas realizing our vision for a welcoming community requires actively addressing the lived experiences of those in our community who do not feel welcome, safe, valued, or included. And whereas historic and current impacts of individual, institutional, and systemic racism that result in harmful disparities in education, employment, income, housing, criminal justice, and quality of life, as well as a sense of belonging. And whereas our community, like others across the nation, has structures, systems, and policies that contribute to injustice, racial inequality, and discriminatory treatment against residents who are born in another country, are Black, Indigenous, or other people of color, LGBTQIA+, Latinx, and other identities. And whereas to capitalize on diversity as an asset, our community must strive to create a culture and environment that ensures everyone can belong and thrive. Now, therefore, we, the mayors of Bellevue, Issaquah, Kirkland, Redmond, and Sammamish, Washington, jointly proclaim September 9th to 18th, 2022 as Eastside Welcoming Week. And we invite the community to engage in opportunities during Eastside Welcoming Week and beyond to learn, connect across differences, and take joint action to achieve a welcoming, equitable, and inclusive community. Come on up.
Hello, my name is Sophia Hashmi, and I just graduated at Issaquah High School, and I will be going to University of Washington to study economics. And I will be emceeing, oh, thank you. I will be emceeing for the Welcoming Week event this Friday at the Community Center, and I'm super excited, and I hope to see you guys all there. And I'm just really happy to be accepting this proclamation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Hashmi? Exciting stuff. Next on our agenda this evening under special business is ID 1243. This is Issaquah Police Department promotions and new hires, and I'd like to ask Chief of Police Paula Schwann and the new officers to come and meet me over at the podium.
Good evening. Thank you, everybody. A couple months ago, we talked about bringing forth your staff here in the city that you don't always see in the police department. So a lot of them work nights, a lot of them work in the jail, where the regular citizens don't see them as much as some of the others. And so tonight is an opportunity. We have a large group because, as you know, we've been hiring, and I wanted to make sure some of them have been working with us for a while and some are fairly new. But I thought this was a perfect opportunity. First, I'd like to say thank you to the council member and to Mayor Lou Polly for the proclamations. We work daily with the court, couldn't do our jobs without them, and that's huge. And the other proclamations as well, because we want to continue to bridge gaps between the police and all our communities. So thank you for that. Tonight with us we have several different of our, we have corrections officers, we have a police officer, so we have 2 paintings of badges that are both different swearing-ins, and we also have our records supervisor, and so I'll go through those. Maggie Scroggins. Maggie, can you step forward just so we know who they're talking about? There you go, thank you. You can step back after Maggie comes to us from Oregon. She is a emergency communications specialist down in Southern Oregon, and she was a lateral. She came to us and she's worked, she was hired in April of this year, and she had experience and was one of their best employees, and they were very sad when we took her from them. So we were happy to have her and glad she moved up here with us. Christy came to us, has worked for several different agencies. She's worked at South Sound 911 in Pierce County, and she also worked for Suncom, which is in Yakima. She worked there for 9 years, and she worked for South Sound for about a year. And we're very glad to have her. She also comes with a lot of experience. She was also a trainer, and so we're super excited. She's been with us since July. Shafiq, he was hired in August. We're, again, another lateral. We've acquired him from Seattle, I guess is the best way to put that. He's been with us for a few months. He was new to Seattle itself. He had been EMT prior and a dispatcher as well. He also worked for Valley Hospital for approximately 5 years and Allendale Police Department in New Jersey for about 9 years. So comes with a lot of experience, and we're happy to have him. He's one of our dispatchers as well. Nicole Summers, she is our new records supervisor. It was a long time coming. We finally were able to go through a lot of different applicants, and we think we found the best person for the job here in Issaquah. She comes with a lot of experience. She was a sergeant at SCORE for 7 years. She wasn't a sergeant for 7 years, but she was employed by SCORE for 7 years, and she had been also an acting lieutenant for a good portion of that time. So she's going through the ropes, and she's going to be a great asset for us. Ryan Smith. Ryan Smith is our first analyst, crime analyst, and we got her from San Diego, and she was a huge asset for them. I'm not even going to try and say what this was. Can you announce what that was? It's epidemiology. There you go. So she did a great lot of work with the COVID protocols and different things, and now she's come to us. Her family's here. She was actually a high school graduate of Issaquah, and so we're glad to have her home. So that was very nice, and we're excited to have her and all the great stuff and information she's going to be providing for a lot of people in the city from the police department. So that's a huge asset. We also have Michael Watson, who is one of our corrections officers. He was hired in May, and he was a lateral corrections. He worked for the Washington State Department of Corrections for 3 years. And Shelby Parkin, unfortunately, she's not with us here. She's another new hire that she came on in June. She was a lateral from King County Jail, and she'd been there with them for 6 years, and she's in the middle of her PhD. So she comes with a lot of education as well as knowledge and experience. And then we have Officer Lucas Doyle. He's an entry-level officer. He started with us this last month. He's from Wadena, Minnesota. He has a bachelor's in criminology and criminal justice, and Hamlin University is where he got his criminal justice degree. So we're gonna have Mayor come up, and he's gonna read the proclamation to 7, and then we'll go on with Mr. Lucas Doyle.
And do you have, you guys all set up?
Yep.
Okay. So this is for everybody except, well, I'll turn this on. Over here, so that I can see all your amazing faces. Welcome. So we are going to do the oath all together, and so I will read short little clips of it. I'm sure you read it. And you just have to state your name after my first little sentence. So if you could raise your hand. I state your name. Recognize this badge. Okay, recognize this badge as a symbol of public faith. And I accept it as a public trust to be held, so long as I am true to the ethics of this department. On my honor, I will never betray our badge. My integrity, my character, or the public trust. I will always have the courage to hold myself and others accountable for our actions. I will always uphold the Constitution, my community, and the Issaquah Police Department. Fantastic. Thank you. Call up Lucas. Want to step forward? You can just stand up here at the dais with me is great. Same thing. I'm just going to read you in short sentences. Just repeat after me. So raise your hand. I state your name.
I, Priscilla,
Having been duly appointed
having been duly appointed
to the office of police officer
to the office of police
of,
officer
of the city of Issaquah, Washington,
of the city of Issaquah, Washington,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully and impartially
that I will faithfully and impartially
perform the duties of my office
perform the duties of my office
as prescribed by law
as prescribed by law
and to the best of my ability,
and to the best of my ability,
and that I will support and maintain
and that I will support and maintain
the ordinances of the city of Issaquah
the ordinances of the city of Issaquah,
and the laws and constitution
the laws and constitution
of the state of Washington
of the state of Washington
and of the United States of America.
and of the United States of America.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations. And your wife Tatiana is here tonight. Would you like to come up and put your pin on? Tatiana, would you like to come up? Awesome. Congratulations. Congratulations.
Thank you again, Council, for giving us the opportunity and the time to meet your staff. Okay, you guys can sit down. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief. If there is no objection, I'd like to call a short 5-minute recess to allow our guests to exit. Okay with that? Okay, we're recessing at 7:30 for 5 minutes. public process, and the city takes comments seriously. We thank you for taking the time to address us this evening. City Clerk, can you please identify the first person who signed up to speak tonight?
And Mayor, Olin is working on getting us back online. Okay, we're back. All right, yes, and I see we have some folks who have joined us by phone. I'm unable to see your name, so if you have called in by phone and I announce your name, please press *3 to raise your virtual hand, and I will unmute you. The first person who signed up to speak is John McGuire. Is John here in the room? All right, and I don't see that a John McGuire is online with us unless he's joined by phone, so we'll move on. The next person who has signed up to speak is Wes Miller. Is Wes in the room? No, and again, if I call your name and you've joined by phone, please press *3. We'll go ahead and move on to the next person who signed up to speak, Mike Palm. Okay.
Mike, can you check if the button is pressed on the microphone? It would be red if it's on.
Now it is.
Thank you.
Hey, can you hear me better? Good evening. My name is Mike Palm. I live at 1879 Kincaid Walk in Issaquah. Thank you for this opportunity to share my concerns about public safety. As you know from the listening session hosted at Blakely Hall in June, crime was a top priority for 72% of the Issaquah Highlands residents. In recent weeks, crime in Issaquah Highlands has continued to increase. Cars have been broken into, businesses have been broken into, vandalized, and just walking down the street, you see a car door wide open on Saturday morning with the windows broken out. There wasn't even anything in the car to be stolen. I request the city of Issaquah join the cities of Auburn, Black Diamond, Enumclaw, Federal Way, Kent, Pacific, Renton, and Tukwila in requesting state legislature and King County take action to reduce crime. I submitted a copy of the open letter that these South King County cities submitted on August 4th, both to the city council, the mayor, and when I signed up to speak tonight, so I think everybody's seen it. Because HB 1054, which is widely cited as contributing to the increase in crime, was sponsored by our 5th District Representatives Bill Ramos and Lisa Callan, I wrote both Bill Ramos and Lisa Callan requesting they take action to resolve the unintended consequences of this bill in June of '21. Unfortunately, during the last legislative session, neither of them took action to resolve these issues. I'm hoping that if Issaquah City Council weighs in on this issue with the other cities in King County, it will persuade Bill Ramos and Lisa Callan to take action in the next legislative session, since it's obvious that this has increased the crime in our communities. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mike. City Clerk, who's next up to speak?
Next, we have Tanya Olisany.
Hi, it's Ulisny. My name is Tanya Ulisny. I'm here to talk about tenant protections. I am the residential property manager of Wildwood Apartments at 660 Wildwood Boulevard. I felt it was really important to speak here today to give you and share with you my perspective at firsthand as I am on the front line. The proposed ordinance would be a large burden on our property and all of multi-housing. We are already providing 2 months notice for proposed rent increases per state law, and that is double what was prior to COVID. Requiring us to double yet again gets us so far out that it fails to provide us with reasonable certainty to be able to capture market conditions. To illustrate the changing market conditions we deal with, consider the following. The apartment market is seasonal. It's very strong in the spring and in the summer when prices tend to increase, and it is weaker during the fall and winter time when many apartments are offering specials in order to rent up. The largest cost of most apartment complexes is real estate and insurance and labor. The first two change once a year, and the end is different at different times of the year. Neither one of these are within our control, and our cost increases in recent years have been very large, with property taxes being 30% in just 2 years, and real estate taxes up 21% in the past 2 years. Then you have cost increases to pass along, which is through our vendors, which are landscapers, janitors, pest control, painters, plumbers, and electricians. Their costs are largely impacted by inflation, as is in our labor and cost. And since COVID hit, we've also been impacted by the additional costs of related to supply chain. To compensate the lack of certainty that would accompany a 120-day notice, we will have to estimate what we think the cost increase would be before we know for sure. And we may have to err on the higher side of an actual market and rent increase higher than we expect. If we underestimate rents and we can't cover our cost, we have to make up for that loss, whether it be from a small owner, a local owner, or even a national owner. We have to achieve a budget. My ability to reinvest in the property and through renovation, repairs, and improvements are highly dependent upon my budget. The most important takeaway that I would like to provide for you is that a restrictive ordinance is that owners want to invest in their communities, and they want to be able to not have to have a financial risk when it comes to restrictive laws and ordinances. Most multifamily houses like to take and reinvest in properties and build more multifamily housing. This ultimately will lead to a larger, if this restrictive law and ordinance is part of, does pass through, that ultimately will lead to a larger housing shortage than we currently already have, which will also lead to higher housing costs. The simple law of supply and demand is clearly part of this equation. Thank you for your consideration, and I encourage you to vote no, as this proposal is not a good solution for that you're intending it to, which is tenants. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. City Clerk, who's up next?
Carrie McGill.
Well, good evening, Council and Madam Mayor. I'm Carrie McGill, and I'm from 1595 Northwest Gilman Boulevard at Raleigh Properties. I'm the CEO and the owner of Raleigh Properties, and you just heard from my property manager for my residential properties, Tanya Ulisny. Wildwood Apartments is our only residential holding that we have right now. It consists of 5 buildings with a total of 85 units that were built by my grandfather and my father in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Because we are one of the oldest multifamily residential properties in Issaquah, we are on the more affordable end of apartments as far as the rental range goes. And I'm here to tell you tonight that we currently do not have any apartment tenants who are delinquent, much less facing eviction. In fact, in my career of almost 30 years of working for Raleigh Properties, we have only ever had 2 apartment evictions, and both were for extreme circumstances. So I ask you, relative to this proposed ordinance, what problem are you trying to solve? It almost feels like a solution in search of a problem, at least from my perspective. And I don't have the whole perspective, but from my perspective, it does. Washington State landlord-tenant law has never seen so many changes as in the past 4 years, all done by our state legislature to enhance tenant protections, largely over perceived concerns that there might be a flood of evictions, COVID-related or otherwise. Tenants in Washington State have never been more protected than they are today. On the flip side, rental property owners are dealing with massive increases in regulations, both with fair housing and with landlord-tenant law, especially if you are a small landlord without a lot of resources And generally, you have less control over the safety and the financial performance of your property. It is getting close to the point where it makes you question why you would want to take on the liability and the costs associated with being a rental property owner. This is not a good thing for our community, especially a community right now like us that has a housing shortage. In order to keep rents reasonable, you're going to need to attract owners and developers willing to take the risk of building more multifamily housing to add to our community supply. And we need to do that as soon as possible. Just because a couple of other neighboring cities have adopted this measure does not mean that it is right for our community. Layering on yet another regulation at a local level where there doesn't appear to be a big local issue is essentially making life more difficult for rental property owners in Issaquah and is another straw on the proverbial camel's back for multifamily housing developers. These increases in costs and bureaucracy go against the affordability objective that this community so desperately wants. So I leave you with the question, what problem are you trying to solve? So thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you, Carrie. City Clerk, who's up next?
Kate?
My name is Kate. Kind of in honor of Jenny Durkin and Carmen Bast, I'm declining to give my last name since all those people showed up in their respective neighborhoods, making life very uncomfortable. I do want to make a brief remark about the presentation to the judge and the court staff, which is when I practiced law. I was lucky enough to practice during a time when Judge Johnson set case schedules in the Superior Court. And all it took was one lawyer getting fined $50 for not filing something on time, and the word spread like wildfire. I will tell you, justice delayed is justice denied. It was wonderful to have firm court dates and schedules and things. Oh, it was so much better practicing law. But I'm here because I disappointed my stepson. I was writing to him, and I mentioned in passing that my mail had been stolen 3 times, and I didn't report it to the police, not wanting to bother them. And he said, "Shame on me, shame on me." So I thought, uh-oh, when I heard Mike Palm was going to be here, I thought I better show up too. My mailbox was broken into and the lock broke, and I went to Home Depot, bought a new lock, installed the lock. It was broken in 2 more times, and the lock was not broken, meaning whoever's doing it's got the key. I guess I would just point out there are an amazing number of costs on crime, not just the little piddling $7 to buy a new lock, but I have to go get a post office box, which is now $166 a year. In order to protect the mail that otherwise should be protectable in a mailbox. Last February, before inflation really set in, I had a chat with one of the checkers in a Safeway up on the Highlands, and I talked about the increases in cost of groceries, which in hindsight were nothing then compared to now, but she said a lot of it was due to shoplifting. And she said, yep, they had a lot of trouble with shoplifting where she is. And it really, really surprised me. I can't help but wonder, what the costs of crime are that are built in. I read plenty about the police feeling impaired on that they cannot do normal things to apprehend suspects because of new state laws on the books. And I think that's just not a good way to preserve peace in our communities. I used to thank the police facetiously, saying you stand between me and anarchy, but that's not facetious anymore. It just doesn't seem facetious. I really encourage the City Council to join the letter by the other mayors and encourage the county office to push more for law enforcement and changes in state law on law enforcement. I just feel like we're in a bad situation, especially because Seattle has a new prosecutor who's prosecuting. And that means criminals may choose to engage in their conduct more in suburban areas, and that is of concern to all of us living in what is a very nice town. Thanks very much for listening.
Thank you, Kate. Sarah? Oh, sorry. City Clerk, who's up next?
Sarah White, who's joined us virtually. Sarah, I'm going to make you a panelist now. In just a minute, you should be able to unmute yourself, and you can also choose to turn your video on.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good evening. I live in Issaquah and I am a renter, and I actually work for a nonprofit that runs homeless shelters and provides legal help to low-income tenants. So I think I have a pretty good perspective on the new tenant protections. I moved to Issaquah because I love our small community. I love how we care for one another and put our heads together to solve tough problems. I love our schools and parks and businesses. We have one of the highest median incomes in the state of Washington, and we're 40% renters, and we're concerned about crime in our town. Many of my neighbors brag that they never go into Seattle, and what is implied is because of the crime on the street coming from the homeless population. You know how we keep Issaquah safe? We don't create situations where families are dragged out of their homes by the sheriff because their landlord charged them a $300 a month late fee that was deducted from their rent. We don't create situations where elderly folks are living on the street because their landlord tripled their rent and only gave them 60 days notice to move. If you were late on your cell phone bill and Verizon charged you a $300 late fee, wouldn't you want that law changed? If your daughter bounced a check and had to pay a $500 fee, who would you call? This won't happen to you because we have consumer protection laws. But for the 40% of neighbors who live in rental housing in Issaquah, we don't have those protections. My friends across the street, literally across the street in King County, have those protections, but Issaquah renters do not. If you found out that you needed to move your family tomorrow because of a new job, would 60 days be enough time to start that search, find a new place to move, hire movers, all of it? When my husband accepted a job teaching in this community, we had to take out a loan for the $7,500 we had to give to our landlord to move in. Why did we have to pay so much? After already proving we had a spotless rental history, excellent credit, great employment. And when I leave, if he claims that I didn't clean the apartment well enough, there is absolutely no law that prevents him from keeping my entire $7,500. I have no power. These laws won't protect my security deposit, but they could limit it. If you miss your mortgage payment, do you know how long you'll have before an action is brought against you? Most people don't know, but it's 140 days. That's federal law. But for the 40% of our neighbors in Issaquah, we have 14 days before we lose our housing. These 3 tenant protections are not controversial. We aren't talking about doing anything grand like fining landlords who refuse to provide heat and water. We aren't limiting how much rent landlords can charge. We aren't talking about turning a rundown hotel into a shelter for handicapped senior citizens. We aren't talking about limiting landlords in any way or penalizing them in any way. We're just begging for simple laws that we should all want. Laws that can drastically benefit renters and lessen homelessness in our community. Laws that already exist in all of our neighboring communities. Laws that hurt no one and only help. These protections will especially help the BIPOC and Latinx communities that you honored here tonight. As someone who works in legal aid, I can assure you that this problem is indeed in our community. I am exhausted from seeing elderly people with serious health issues who are kicked out of their homes and into tents because they didn't have enough time to find a new place to live. These are folks who have paid their rent every month, but their rents have tripled and they just don't have time to find a new place to move to. I'm tired of seeing families sleeping in their cars because of a $300 late fee was charged on a rent payment that was a few days late, and that late fee was then taken out of the next month's rent. I'm sick to death of people who are being evicted for small amounts of money or because they cannot vacate in 60 days, and then they can't ever get approved for another rental because the eviction's on their record permanently. I am sick of hearing about how all of these new laws are making it impossible for landlords, and yet they can still charge any amount of rent that they wish. They can raise rents as much and as often as they want to. They just have to give notice. There is no rental inspection to be sure that the homes that they rent are up to code. There's no enforcement by the city to make sure that these rentals are maintained. I've spoken to tenants whose houses are completely uninhabitable, and there is no legal recourse to compel the landlord to fix the toilet or the heater. Landlords in Washington have very few rules and even fewer enforcements for those rules. I live here, I pay taxes here, I vote here. My landlord does not. Thank you for considering these very simple, very easy new tenant protections that will also decrease crime and homelessness. I hope one day that we can solve the more critical issues, especially an emergency shelter for elderly tenants. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. City Clerk, who's next up?
Yes, the next speaker is Christopher White. Christopher, I will make you a panelist now. You should see an option to unmute and can choose to turn your video on.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you tonight. I live in the Issaquah area. I am a renter, and I have been an educator for 38 years. And I'd like to take this opportunity to talk to you about the impact that the renter protections would have upon families. It was interesting tonight to hear the mayor speak about and to present a proclamation that talked about the safety, security, and welcome that you wish to declare. When renters in Issaquah don't have the same safety, security, and welcome protections that those in unincorporated King County right next door and surrounding us actually have. It's important to understand that what happens when a short notice, an abbreviated notice to move or relocate, whether it be due to a draconian fee that's been placed on a fee that we just heard about, or an arbitrary and capricious rent increase that has gone on that's far and above the rate of inflation, despite what we may have heard earlier, or this abbreviated and unrealistic relocation time period. Who can move in that amount of time? That has upon families. But let's talk about children. When, as an educator, our mantra in education, Issaquah has some of the finest schools out there. We hold them up as models to the state. When we talk about children and in education, it's what's best for the kids. But when a family has to move, and no matter what time of year it is, it's a scary time for children. And especially if it's during the school year, the families are first going to let's try and find a place where the kids can stay in their school and stay with their teacher. Because if we have to move out of that school, the disruption to learning, the learning loss that we've talked about during COVID is immense. And the learning loss is the least of the issues when we talk about the disruption to the kids' social and emotional learning, their social development, their loss of friends, their loss of stability that goes on there. But when we talk about their learning, I mean, we're talking about a different curriculum, a different scope of sequence. We're talking about different activities. For older kids, we're talking about they may lose their opportunities for their IB programs, their AP programs, their connection to college programs. When we talk about special things like high cap programs or access to special ed programs, or we celebrated Hispanic month here, but what about those multilingual learners that need those supports that they may not be able to get anymore because they have to move to a whole new school or a whole new district? This disruption to the children that is impactful in it. And even from the day one that they're first notified of this move, they all of a sudden lose their focus because now they have to concern about the instability of the family setting. It's just a major impact upon these children. We really have to think about these things. What are the impacts to the family beyond just the fact of we have a new house to find, we have a new apartment to find? So I urge you to really consider these things. What is the true impact that we have upon the family? What is the human decision? What is the right thing to do for the people that it impacts? So what is best for children? What is best for families? Let's think about that proclamation that we had at the beginning of our evening of how do we create that safe, secure, and welcome environment for all. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Christopher. City Clerk, who's next?
Next, we have Elizabeth Maupin.
Hello, Council. My name is Elizabeth Maupin. Issaquah has been my home since 1982. I own a house at 100 Big Bear Place, which I have sometimes rented out. I've also rented rooms to temporary lodgers. I've served on the city's Human Services Commission, and I recall their vision statement as Issaquah strives to be a sustainable and healthy community where every person is important and where meeting basic human needs is a shared responsibility between individuals and the community, unquote. I speak to you as both a citizen and a landlord concerned that our current rents are not sustainable or healthy, and that this must be addressed because housing is a basic human need. In August of this year, 39 to 40% of Issaquah housing units are renter occupied. The average size is 1,077 square feet, and the average rent is $2,788 a month. Our rents are rising much faster than the national average. Issaquah currently has a higher average rent than other Washington cities, higher than both Bellevue and Seattle. A regional coalition for housing has brought to you 3 modest proposals to provide protection for renters. I understand that you are hesitating to enact these measures because you want to be consistent with what other cities are doing, and others have now told you that similar measures are being considered and enacted in nearby cities. I will encourage us not to be the last. Let me address the measures. A cap on security deposits, move-in fees, equivalent to 1 month's rent, in addition to the first month's rent payment, and the ability to pay it in installments. How many renters have more than $5,576 in hand to move into an apartment? Not accepting this provision, allowing some payment over time, will effectively keep some of our folk unhoused. As a landlord, I would rather fill an apartment now and have the additional fees over a 4 to 6 month period than have the property empty. Notice of rent increases, 120 days for increases greater than 3%, 180 days for increases greater than 10%. With rents already so high, an extra $100 or more can quickly cut into funds for other necessities. 10% increases are likely to force people to move out. They need time. They need time to find additional income or to save for the costs of starting over in a new place. The third one is a cap on late fees, 1.5% of monthly rent. People who are late are generally already under financial stress, and high late fees can mean that they will be hard-pressed again when the next rent payment is due. I think a 1.5% is sufficient incentive to pay on time, and it's often much, much more than that. Landlords do have expenses. Substantial rents help landlords, but high turnover doesn't. We honestly need to find a way to cool the housing market. I suspect that the constant rise in property values and the ensuing rise in property taxes, which we depend on rather heavily, significantly contribute to the inflation of rents. Our state constitution currently forbids rent control. So unless the city lobbyist can persuade the legislature to change that, we are stuck trying to find other little ways to keep housing affordable. We really need to look at housing affordability. It's just going through the roof, and people can't afford to live here anymore. Thank you. Maybe we should go to a graduated income tax instead of relying entirely on property tax.
Thank you, Elizabeth. City Clerk, who is our next speaker?
Yes, our next speaker is Daniel Bannon. Is Daniel in the room? Okay, it looks like Daniel has joined us by phone. Daniel, I'll unmute you now.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Hello, my name is Daniel Bannon, and I'm currently living in Ballard. I'm a renter. I'm calling in today on behalf of the Rental Housing Association of Washington and our over 5,000 members across the state. I'm here today to urge the City Council to not pass AB 8451, which would require 120 days notice for nearly all rent increases in Issaquah. A 120-day notice requirement for rent increases does not allow housing providers to accurately assess their cost increasing or the state of the market towards the end of a lease, which is typically when rents are adjusted. This will result in rent increases that are based on an assumption of what costs might be and the state of the rental market 4 months down the line. Accurate rent increases are crucial to keeping naturally affordable housing. In most cases, if the market has remained stagnant, many housing providers will choose to not increase rents year over year. And without the ability to accurately predict the market, as well as assess upcoming expenses, many housing providers will be forced to perpetually raise rents in anticipation of rising costs. We've already seen the negative impacts of excessive notice periods in rental markets all over Washington. To bring up Seattle, for example, a 180-day notice of rent increase is required, which is one of the factors that is contributing to the rising cost of rent in the city. Policies that make it more difficult to provide housing have proven time and time again to harm the natural state of the market, and lengthy notice periods for rent increase are one of the main issues the market is facing. In a survey of our membership in Seattle, 180-day rent increases ranked among the top 2 most difficult policies to navigate when operating a rental business. As part of my job, I also speak with our members on a regular basis, and many of our members have communicated to me that it is much more difficult to be flexible with lease terms, specifically lease lengths, when a housing provider must also remain in compliance with excessive notice periods and requirements. I would additionally like to point out that this type of policy is concerningly close to rent control, which is illegal in the state of Washington. It is essential to listen to the voices of housing providers in order to create policies that create and preserve affordable rental housing. This policy would put an increased administrative burden on housing providers and severely restricts their flexibility in offering new lease terms and negotiating with tenants. The Rental Housing Association of Washington remains available and willing to discuss alternative policies that will have a positive impact on the rental market in Issaquah. We urge the council to reach out to us so we can have these conversations instead of passing restrictive policies that will harm the market. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. City Clerk, who's up next?
Next, we have Danielle Caldwell. Danielle, I don't see your name in the virtual attendee list. If you've joined by phone, please press *3 so that we know you're here. All right, I'm not seeing a response, so we'll move to Guillermo Rivera. All right, and I see a hand raised. Guillermo, I'm unmuting you now.
Great, can you hear me all?
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Mayor and members of the council. My name is Guillermo Rivera, and I'm with Eastside for All. Eastside for All is a racial, equity, and social justice organization based in East King County. We bring forward input from communities that are underrepresented on councils and in other decision-making bodies, despite their significant number among residents and business owners. It's time to hear from everyone that is part of our communities. I came to you last June 22nd to talk and support the ARCH recommendations. Since then, Kirkland, Redmond already purchased some or all of these tenant protections. We also know that Woodville and Newcastle will start to discussing this soon. As leaders in Issaquah, you're fully aware and how complex our region's housing crisis is. You are making your decisions to have the most positive impact. We hope that Issaquah will support regional guidance as other cities are doing. In 2019, the King County Regional Affordable Housing Task Force adopted a 5-year action plan to address the lack of affordable housing and the significant problem of cost-burdened households. These tenant protections are not tenants versus landlords. Tenant protections are the prevention of displacement, are 2 of the 7 goals outlined in the plan of 2019. We cannot reach affordable housing goals and increase housing stability without strengthening protections for tenants. We urge Issaquah to take part of these comprehensive regional strategies that will support Issaquah renters, who make over the 40% of Issaquah households, and help Issaquah meet his affordable housing goals. We have been hearing from communities how hard it is to buy houses. I'm sure you also hear that. So many people need to continue renting for years to come. Many people have to move out of the city or move in with other families because they receive a very short notice of rent increases, or they cannot pay the deposit to move into a new place. Families want to live where they work, where they go to worship, where their kids go to schools. And measures like these ones recommended in the ARCH letter will allow people to continue living in Issaquah. Keep in mind that measures like these ones will benefit everyone, every single family, regardless of their income, wants to have more time when rent increase happens and prepare for future with dignity and respect. So I ask you to consider and approve the ARCH recommendations. I know that more protections are needed along other actions to make rent more affordable. We appreciate your time and want to thank you for the work that you are considering policies to the equity lens. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Guillermo. City Clerk, who's up next?
Jennifer Pertzborn. Jennifer, I'll make you a panelist now. You should then see the option to unmute and can choose to turn your video on. Jennifer, you have the floor. Jennifer, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you now in case you're having any issues unmuting. So your mic is live. Are you ready? Mayor, I'm going to suggest we move on to the next commenter.
Thanks.
Jim Barry.
Hi, I'm Jim Barry. I live at 1810 203rd Avenue Southeast. Thank you, Mayor Pauly and the council for a few minutes here. 3.5 years ago, my wife and I started a program called the Issaquah Sammamish Food Project to support the Issaquah Food Bank. By February of 2020, we had grown it up to, in just a little under a year, to where we were collecting 10,000 pounds of non-perishable food every 2 months. Then life changed a little in the spring of 2020, as most of you probably remember. We managed to stay at that level since then, but did not continue to grow the food project. Excuse me. We are ready to start growing it again. The food bank staff has informed me that their food supplies are at a 10-year low, and they cannot meet the needs of most of the clients who come in to get food. The food project is very simple. You've all got one of these in front of you, I believe. For 99% or 90% of the people, all they have to do is put a bag on their front porch 6 times a year, every other month. For the other 9.9%, it takes about 10 hours a year. There are neighborhood coordinators who pick those bags up off the front porch. I'm asking your help as a council and as individual members of the community to help us grow the food project. It is a very simple project and will help the food bank immensely. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jim. City Clerk, do we have anyone else signed up to speak this evening?
Yes, Devin Glazer. Oh, I'm sorry. Devin is attending virtually. Devin, I'm going to make you a panelist now. You should be able to unmute and can choose to turn your video on.
All right, thank you. I have a few dogs, so forgive me. Thanks for letting me sign up last minute. I didn't realize I had to plan ahead as well as I did. But I guess that's on point considering we're talking about helping tenants plan ahead. I'm an attorney with the Tenant Law Center. I live in Seattle, but you talk to a lot of low-income tenants living in Issaquah who, create community in Issaquah, are voters in Issaquah, attend schools in Issaquah. And I think these proposed steps that are being considered today are really positive first steps. I know there's about 10 ARCH recommendations that are being considered, and we're just now really focusing on the first 3. But I think, if anything, to stop the bleeding and the pain, this is a great start. I talk to a lot of people who are in dire straits, who are facing eviction, and pretty commonly I talk to people who have no legal recourse. Their landlords raise their rent beyond what they can afford to pay. Seniors on Social Security, people on disability, people who are working full time but don't make enough money to keep up with the market. And I've gotten, I guess, relatively good at saying, I'm sorry, but you're gonna have to move out, which sucks. Like, I don't wanna ever have to say that again, and I'll probably say it tomorrow. With that knowledge though, if a tenant has, 4 months advance warning, 6 months advance warning, more time to find a new place, knows that the next place they apply for is not going to charge them quite as much to move in. It's not going to demand an upfront lump sum that they probably don't have. That lessens the blow. There are some people who are completely priced out of the market in King County, and they will either have to move away or live on the street. And that is a failure that we are all perpetuating. But there are other people who, given more time, given more resources, can find ways to make it work, right? Whether that's picking up an extra shift or borrowing money or just saving longer. So in the interest of at least keeping those people on the margins who we can keep housed and hopefully, keep in our community, I think caps on late fees, extra notice for rent increases, and making it slightly more affordable to move into that next place is a really common sense step that I really hope you adopt. Thank you, and I'll yield my extra time.
Thank you, Devin. City Clerk, any more speakers?
No one else who signed up in advance, because we had a few people who didn't respond when their names were called. Just one more call out. If anyone who is attending virtually would like to make comments or missed your first call out, could you please raise your virtual hand? By phone, you can press *3, or you can send me the hosted chat, and I'll just monitor this for a moment. I'm not seeing that anyone else online is wishing to make comments.
Thank you, City Clerk. So we did hear from a couple of individuals today about public safety, and we heard speakers both pro and con on the tenant protections that are on our agenda this evening. We also had Mr. Barry, our neighbor in Sammamish, talk about a fabulous program supporting the food bank. So I thank everybody who took the time out tonight to address the council. You can always write your council as well and submit your comments to citycouncil@issaquahwa.gov. And speaking of that, Council President Walsh, do you have any email comments to summarize on any of tonight's agenda topics?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We did receive quite a few emails, as you can imagine. We received in the kind of against column from 2 statewide multifamily housing association groups, 2 apartment complexes in Bellevue and Seattle, and several residents and real estate agents on the support side, 4 different nonprofits, most of which were not Issaquah specific, one which was Eastside for All, and then 1 resident renter. So we had a mix of commentary on all of the details of this potential ordinance.
Thank you, Council President. The next item of business this evening is committee and regional reports, and we'll start with Councilmember Joe.
Madam Mayor, thank you. Just a couple of brief announcements. The next Cascade Water Alliance Finance meeting is September 20th, and I plan to attend that one. The Cascade General Board meeting is November 28th. Also, if you could put this on your calendars, Sound Cities Association is having their dinner on October 5th in Renton. If you can attend, it's a great time to interact with our fellow electeds. That concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Joe. Councilmember DiMichele.
Thank you, Mayor Pauly. On August 16th, I attended the Connect to Community Advisory Group meeting. We held a discussion about our recommendations regarding a proposal to create a statewide community information exchange that will be coming in front of the legislature this session. On August 24th, I attended a joint meeting of the King County Regional Transportation Boards. The topic was safety, with a presentation from Josh Brown, the Executive Director of the Puget Sound Regional Council. Following that was a discussion, a roundtable discussion from the whole group, and there were about 50, 60 elected officials online. I highlighted the City of Issaquah's project on 2nd Avenue to improve student, pedestrian, and vehicle safety, and I also highlighted the expected improvements in safety from the completion of SR 18. On September 1st, I attended the Healthier Here Governing Board. Our discussion focused on the workforce crisis facing health and behavioral health providers. We also saluted Susan McLaughlin, who has led Healthier Here for 5 years. Susan is taking a position with Harborview Medical Center, and the Healthier Here Board is in the process of recruiting a new executive director. And that ends my report.
Thank you, Councilmember DiMichele. Councilmember Hunt.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The Planning, Development, and Environment Committee met on August 4th, and we had 2 items. The first one was that we continued our discussion on Title 18, which is our zoning and land use code for the City of Issaquah. And we continued this discussion with ID 1156, which was about zoning and development standards. And bear with me because this had a few different parts. The first part was about affordable housing. The committee generally supported changes that were proposed. We also had a conversation about how lack of affordable housing is a worsening problem in Issaquah and in our region. And there was also a discussion here about parking as a cost driver and the need to consider this more and to consider this when we update the parking regulations, so interconnected pieces of Title 18 here. And there will be more on this to come with the parking discussions. We also had a conversation on transfer of development rights, or TDRs, and the committee generally supported including hillsides in this. And we also had a discussion about the Landscape Conservation and Infrastructure Program, which is abbreviated as LCLIP. This is a King County program that allows cities to receive a portion of future property tax revenue for local infrastructure investments if they implement a program to obtain regional TDRs. So this would expand the ability of Issaquah to conservation projects outside of Issaquah, but within our watershed, for example. So the committee generally was supportive of considering this further, and generally felt that there are benefits benefits to Issaquah for conservation projects, for example, directly outside of Issaquah in King County, in unincorporated King County. Then 2 other topics, landmarks. There was general agreement on the code changes, and this was largely administrative. And then lastly, on parking. Here, the committee had a consensus that space in central Issaquah should be used efficiently and more pedestrian, and made to be more pedestrian friendly. We think there's a lot of work to do to get there. And this is a big topic for future updates as well. So there will be improvements made in this Title 18 update and then future conversation subsequent to this update. We also had a discussion about EV vehicle parking, and the committee felt that we wanted to have some time with the existing EV vehicle parking code, especially because we fairly recently did update that part of the code, so we wanted to have some more time with the community and with the business community to see how that code is being used before making new changes to that recently updated code. That concludes that first item that was on our agenda. The other item was the Title 18 Land Use Code Futures Update List, but I actually reported out on this at our August 8th Committee of the Whole meeting because we discussed that as a council, so I will skip repeating myself on that one. The next meeting of the Planning, Development, and Environment Committee is September 7th, tomorrow, and we have two items, ID 0976, which is the Storm and Surface Water Master Plan, and ID 1157, the Title 18 Land Use Code follow-up items. This will have additional materials on zones and uses, building and design, and parking. Then lastly, I have two upcoming regional meetings to announce. Regional Water Quality Committee will meet tomorrow. We have briefings on several technical issues, including combined sewer overflows and the budget implications of this. And then the Salmon Recovery Council for WIRA 8, our watershed. This will meet on September 15th, and the agenda is not yet set, and that concludes my report.
Thank you, Councilmember Hunt. Councilmember Reyes, I mentioned earlier, has an excused absence this evening, and we'll be going to Councilmember Martz.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The Council Services, Safety, and Parks Committee, after a wonderful August hiatus, will next be meeting Wednesday, September 20th at 6:30 p.m. here in Council Chambers. We don't have an agenda yet, but I'm pretty sure there's going to be at least one safety item on there, so it'll be interesting for the public. The Puget Sound Regional Council Growth Management Policy Board met last Thursday, September 1st, from 10 till noon. I was not there, unfortunately, but my understanding is no action was taken. The Sound Cities Association Public Issues Committee will be meeting next Wednesday, September 14th, from 7 till 9 p.m., continuing the online virtual nature, at least for one more month. No action is anticipated, and Deputy Council President Hall will be our representative at that meeting. This concludes my report.
Thank you, Councilmember Martz. Deputy Council President Hall.
Thank you. A quick report this evening. The next meeting of the Eastside Fire and Rescue Board of Directors is this coming Thursday, September 8th at 4 p.m. at our headquarters on Newport Way. Notable on our agenda is the unveiling of EFR's new strategic plan. So that will be presented to us on Thursday, and our plan, after discussing with the administration, is now then to come back to this council for any feedback or thoughts you guys might have before then we adopt it at the October EFR board meeting. So that is coming up. Stay tuned, and that concludes my report.
Thank you. Council President Walsh.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Very short report. All of my August meetings were canceled, which was a blessing. The Affordable Housing Committee, which I'm part of, will next meet on September 29th at 1 p.m. in a virtual meeting, and the agenda is not yet released. That concludes my report.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda this evening is the mayor's report. There will be an executive session this evening to discuss the sale or lease of property per RCW 42.30.110(1)(c) and pending potential litigation per RCW 42.30.110(1)(i). These items are expected to take a total of 1 hour and 15 minutes, but no action is anticipated to follow an open session. Tonight's consent agenda includes AB 8449, seeking council authorization to enter into a participation and allocation agreement regarding funds paid by the settling opioid distributors in Washington State. Settlement. This is in addition to the agreement 1 Washington Memorandum of Understanding that was authorized by City Council at its April 18th, 2022 meeting. In order for the settlement to move forward, the 3 agreements must be filed with the Attorney General's office by September 23rd, and 90% of eligible jurisdictions are needed to join, otherwise the settlement will be void. Tonight's agenda also includes AB 8445, seeking authorization from the City Council to award the contract for the salt storage cover project. The bids on this project came in above original staff estimates due to the state of inflation and supply chain issues. The project is necessary to protect these heavy salts from rainfall, which dissolves the salt and causes a loss of product, diminished product effectiveness, and pollution issues. The project will allow the city to comply with stormwater codes. As was noted earlier this evening, the Eastside cities of Bellevue, Kirkland, Redmond, Sammamish, and Issaquah are joining together to celebrate and proclaim September 9th through 18th, 2022 Eastside Welcoming Week. I invite residents to engage in welcoming activities, including the following events, which are happening in Issaquah. Issaquah welcomes you. Join us Friday, September 9th from 5 to 8 p.m. at the Issaquah Community Center for a free family-oriented event to celebrate the cultural diversity of our community. It's going to go off script. There is food, there is entertainment. There are lots of reasons to go to this event on Friday night. There is also a story stroll. Children and adults can enjoy reading stories about inclusion while spending time outdoors. Events hosted by the King County Public Library will be held downtown and in the Highlands September 9th through 27th. And welcoming economies. Belonging begins with us. Are you on our map? Our diverse businesses make our community more vibrant by expanding cultural offerings, creating jobs, and attracting new customers to our community. Are you an Issaquah business owner and employee? Then add a pin to the Belonging Begins With Us map to showcase where you grew up. Whether it's Iowa or India, we value your contribution to our community. Please visit issaquah.gov/welcomes for more information. We have a bunch of upcoming events as well. The Downtown Art Walk and Music Stroll on September 10th from 5 to 8 p.m. invites everyone to come stroll downtown's charming shops, boutiques, and restaurants to the tune of live music. There's more information available on the Downtown Issaquah Association's website. And United We Are Stronger. I'm going to try this, but Unidos Somos Más Fuertes. The City of Issaquah invites you to a celebration for Hispanic Heritage Month on September 17th, 6 to 8 p.m. This in-person event will be held at the Issaquah Senior Center and includes a Mexican folklore dance lesson, Papa Picado, Mexican streamers crafting, a Mexican food truck, and more. To learn more, visit the Hispanic Heritage Month page or contact Marisol Visser with our Human Services and Community Court Assistant. Salmon on Sunset, Boogie Bites and Brews. Friends of the Issaquah Salmon Hatchery announced their first annual event welcoming home our salmon to Issaquah's historic downtown hatchery. This will feature salmon spawning, live music, beer garden, rubber duck derby, tours, big raffles and giveaways, art and activities for all ages, a native plant garden, and much more. So please join us on September 17th from 12 to 6 p.m. for this fun event. State Park Free Pass Day is September 24th in honor of National Public Lands Day. And finally, our last farmers market of the year is September 24th from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. And that concludes the mayor's report. So we'll move on to informational updates. ID 1265. This is a Parks and Community Services Department update on summer highlights. And I'd like to invite Parks and Community Services Director Jeff Watling to present this item.
Mayor, thank you so much. Good evening, council. Forgive me as I walk and chew gum here and share my screen. Okay, there we go. Thank you so much. Busy night tonight. I've been asked to come up and provide an update on some of our activities this summer, and I guess I just want to highlight one thing and thank you. So much of your work is in really hard policy work and budget work. Your policy and budget work, though, leads to this kind of stuff, the delivery of programs and services. So want to provide a quick overview, a quick tour of what we were busy with these last 9 or 10 weeks. And I thought I'd start with this visual. In many ways, this is a visual of the last concert on the Green event. It in many ways depicts and reflects what we felt throughout our department this year. This community was ready to come together and feel a sense of normalcy, and that's something we saw throughout the department. Just a quick, I guess, sense of what we do. Parks and Community Services can be a pretty complicated department with all the divisions that we have, but really it boils down to something pretty simple. We do two things. We make investments in people and we make investments in places through your support. Investments in people are done through terrific work by staff and recreation, our arts program, as well as human services divisions. Those investments in people aren't directly done solely by us. Though we provide some direct programs, so much of what we've done is through terrific partnerships with agencies and others throughout this community that allows us to support residents, families, and really help foster a sense of community here in Issaquah. The investments we make in places include our very important work in stewarding the land that this community, that these residents own in their parks, their trails, and their open space, as well as the recreation facilities that both offer recreation programs but also offer places for people to go, and that's the community center, the pool, the senior center, and Pickering Barns. So we're about people and places. So I'm going to touch real quickly on people first, starting with our recreation teams. At the community center and through our athletics division, very, very busy year, busy summer of summer day camps. Through our 9 weeks of day camps, we saw 1,400 campers come through our programs. Through our sports camps, a variety of sports camps with a variety of partners, 1,200 campers through those programs. Our concerts on the green, you saw the photo of, we easily averaged over 1,000 residents each night for those concerts. Varied a little bit depending on weather, but certainly extremely well attended. Our Gliders track and field program, which is something we do in the summer, track and field, and in the fall for cross country, has become immensely popular. We had 150 youth take part in that terrific program. Our picnic shelter rentals continue to see huge numbers, over 170 picnic shelter rentals. That doesn't include just your drop-in, hey, if it's available, you can always go use it. Again, a community ready to come together in so many ways. At the Julius Bone Pool, swim lessons, much like our camps, saw tremendous numbers, over 1,200 participants in our swim lesson programs. In a relatively small 6-lane pool, that's a lot. Huge increases in our lap swim and water exercise programs. Another note that the Zach and the team up at the pool do, we offer certified lifeguard classes. It's a great way for us to recruit our own lifeguards, but we also, through these certified classes, actually, both as a revenue source, but we teach lifeguard programs to other cities. We offer our lifeguard certifications to Sammamish and Medina in their outdoor programs. A quick note also at the pool, and this is very true of the community center, we're a teen employer. We take that very seriously and we take that very intentionally. In that the pool alone, we hired over 50 teens for providing either lifeguard, filling our lifeguard schedules, or our swim lesson programs. Staff take that very seriously. We train up staff. Many of, in these cases, we see it as an opportunity that we're a first-time employer for these teens. I think if we saw a show of hands in this room alone, many of us started with a recreation job of some kind and turned pro in something else. And so though they're employees and they're part of a team, we really see that as a teen program in and of itself. I could say the same for our summer day camp programs. The Pickering Barn, thank you, Mayor, for mentioning farmers markets coming to an end. Oh my gosh, we were at over 3,400 shoppers a week. That's above pre-pandemic levels. So again, a community that's wanting to come together. Our rentals and weddings, given a little bit of a backlog the last couple of years, we had 65 weddings and rentals May through August. That's a really big number. And 2 new staff there. So Kayla Diane, our new supervisor, Tavi, our new coordinator there, have just done an amazing job at the barn. Busy summer. Our senior center, what a great place that has certainly been as well. Some new programs being offered. A senior hiking group that's been immensely popular as seniors want to get outdoors. Our lunch program and all the socialization that goes with that has certainly come back to significant numbers. SAIL, which is a Stay Active and Independent for Life program, sees an average of 20 seniors per class on average. And our senior center volunteers, I think in many ways, a key metric to a healthy, vibrant place that people want to be at is your number of volunteers. And to have 30-plus volunteers providing 200-plus hours a month of support at the senior center certainly tells us that is a place that is safe, a place that clearly, given 4 or 5 years ago, had a pretty significant transition in front of it. Tells us that we've been making some really good transitions there. And hats off to a new staff person there, Recreation Supervisor Kirsten May came on board earlier this year. Sticking with our teams that provide services to people, our Human Services team continued fantastic work. You'll see in your packet tonight as well the quarterly memo that really highlights so much of the great work of that Human Services team, but a couple of highlights I want to note. We offered a summer resource fair for the first time. I'm looking at Monica as I say this. The great thing about this department is we're able to start piggybacking on each other's programs. So the Chalk Art Festival wasn't just a Chalk Art Festival. It was also a Human Services fair. And so we see great opportunities in providing those opportunities in tandem. Our Behavioral Health and Homelessness Outreach Program continues to do really hard work, but really good work. You'll see in the quarterly report as well, but I want to highlight 53 individuals we're working with are all working towards at least one goal. Of terrific note, in the summer alone, 11 new individuals were permanently housed. That brings our annual total to 20 individuals who have been permanently housed through that program. That's significant. Our 23-24 Human Services Grant Review process and recommendations, the Human Services Commission as well as Human Services team have been hard at work this summer reviewing over 80 applications. Those recommendations will be coming to you via the mayor as part of the budget process, and look forward to your support there. We had a Juneteenth event this year. The Equity Board did a great job of hosting that on June 20th. Nearly 100 individuals attended that event at the Senior Center. We were really had the benefit of some great educational evening with Dr. Dilbert Richardson, who was there. Upcoming fall events, the Proclamation certainly highlighted what's coming up with Welcoming Week and Hispanic Heritage Month as well. So continued great work by the Human Services team. In arts, Amy Dukes mentioned earlier the Chalk Art Festival. Despite literally the hottest day of the year, July 26th, I think many of you might remember the concert that night as well. Over 250 young residents came and took part in the Chalk Art Festival. You'll see a photo here of the asphalt mural that was added on Festival Street. We think a great way to encourage a pedestrian path, but use art with a purpose, and art that as a whimsical way of inviting people down and into Memorial Park and Depot Park. Shakespeare in the Park took place on the 28th of July. Over 300 residents attended Midsummer Night's Dream. The Creative District continues to do their work this summer. They led some focus groups really seeking input on art-making spaces and what art-making spaces needs are, not only along Front Street, within the whole Creative Art District. We're also, though it's summer, beginning to do work on holiday lighting for 2022. The last couple of years, it's been fun to see that program continue to grow. Look for a little bit further expansion of the holiday lighting this coming winter, which will be exciting. Oops, I went one too far ahead. Moving to our places that we manage real quickly, the park operations team. I want to start this with a thank you to you, really, Mayor and Council. The additional resources over the past couple of years that you've committed to, we're really beginning to see some returns on that investment. One example, this year's budget that you approved last fall, we're piloting where we consolidated our right-of-way landscaping and have one contractor providing that. That has allowed our staff hours, our limited staff hours, to really spend focused time in our parks and our open space and our trails. And the level of service within those spaces is really showing itself this summer, and residents have been immensely happy with those results. The team has been immensely happy with the work they've been able to get to. Our park operations manager, thanks to your budgetary support, is providing real day-to-day leadership. That's Rick Still to the team. So great work being done. We've initiated a turf management program that we haven't, I don't think, ever done. Our athletic fields are certainly seeing the response and better level of service there. We've been able to get some court resurfacing projects done this summer at Central Park and at Blackberry Park as part of the construction effort going on at Blackberry. And Green Issaquah continues. So we look forward this fall as that set of volunteer opportunities and volunteer events start to fill up for this fall. And lastly, within our park planning and development team, that has not been a boring summer there either. Blackberry Park, as I mentioned earlier, is now under construction. We anticipate an October completion with that as we've worked through every supply chain bump for playground equipment and everything else you would expect. Trails map update that we wanted to get done this year is completed. I provided copies to each of you, so those listening, the trails maps will be available throughout town. We also have a handy QR code on this version of the map for easy, I'm not going to use the right IT term, drop down into your phone. I'm not the IT director. Hillside Park, work continues there. We worked with the community throughout this summer. We had a preferred concept that we presented to the neighborhood. Feedback for that finished here in August. Really happy to say that over 80% of the respondents felt that that preferred concept really met that really important balance of adding elements, adding some play elements to the park and some trail improvements, but also respecting really the natural character of that park. So excited to present those results, work with the park board in September, and then be moving into design and permitting for that long-awaited project. But I really feel like we've reached careful consensus there. Wayfinding sign program, you may have noticed the prototypes are up down on the Rainier Trail by the community center. For any residents listening in, please go down and take a look. There's a QR code or an opportunity for you to take a quick survey and let us know what you think. Those prototypes are important. We want to get feedback from the community before making those investments into new signs on our trails, trailheads, and parks. And then lastly, the community investment strategy. The work we started with you in a July discussion has continued in earnest these last 8-9 weeks with the park board as we've really dove into the 7 criteria we presented to all of you. We've been going through an evaluation process with all options and sites. We feel like we're now pared down to what feels like some options that we can now put some dollars to, and the goal is by the end of September to be able to come back to you with the rationale you were requested and some vetting and some recommendations. So that work continues. And with that, again, thank you. I would be remiss if I didn't say the work that this department does is, you have some terrific people who work in this department. An incredibly diverse set of professionals that really care about Issaquah, and the work they do shows. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Director Watling, for that very comprehensive update of all of the things that you have been working on. And it is noticeable moving around the city, seeing new art and great upgrades and maintenance to some of our parks. So thank you for all that you do. It's an informational update. We usually don't have questions. So, okay, let's move on. The consent calendar is the next item, and it was distributed to council in advance. And if authorized, the items on the consent calendar will be considered together and approved by one motion. Have the payables and payroll been reviewed?
Yes, they have.
Thank you. Does any council member desire to remove any item from the consent calendar and consider it under regular business? Seeing none, could I get a motion? Council President?
I move to approve the consent calendar as presented in tonight's agenda.
I'll second that motion.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded to approve the consent calendar as presented. Is there any council discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That passes unanimously, 6-0 vote. So now we're moving into regular business, AB 8451, Tenant and Landlord Protections Ordinance. The ask before the council this evening is, or the action before the council this evening is to adopt the ordinance. And I'd like to invite City Attorney Rachel Bender-Turpin and Human Services Manager Mona Negrilla to present this item. Welcome.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and council members. This is Monica Negrilla. I'm going to start the presentation, and Rachel will join us as she will provide more details on the ordinance. I'm going to start by providing a background of this agenda item, a brief summary of the committee meetings and the outreach, and then we will have Rachel provide the details and answer legal questions. So thank you so much for having us here tonight. I'm going to go ahead and get started. So based on recommendations that we received from the Council Services, Safety, and Parks Committee, we are coming to you all at the full council meeting, and we are seeking authorization for an ordinance for tenant protections. Specifically, the ordinance proposes 120-day notice for any residential rent increases of over 3%. And just as a note, the ordinance applies for non-subsidized tenancies. As I mentioned, a brief background. This agenda item is in front of you because back in April, a regional coalition on housing, ARCH, issued a resolution recommending tenant protections. And so with that, we took the information to the Council Services meeting in June, where we provided a summary of the outreach that our staff did to tenants and landlords. And then we returned in July with a summary of protections considered by other jurisdictions. So just as a brief overview and reminder, the main three actions proposed by ARCH had to do with providing rent increases and requiring landlords to provide a minimum of 120 days written notice for any rent increases greater than 3%, and 100 days notice for rent increases greater than 10%. ARCH recommendations also provided for a cap on late fees, specifically a cap that will be at 1.5% of a tenant's monthly rent, and then also a cap on move-in fees, particularly making sure that move-in fees, including security deposits, will be capped at no more than one month's rent. And that also this will be, the payment will be allowed to be made in installments. So based on that information, we conducted back in June outreach to both tenants and landlords. We reached out to about and talked with and surveyed about 50 tenants, and we reached out to 26 landlords. We heard back from 22 at that time. And really, we heard heartbreaking stories from both sides, as you also heard tonight in public comments. Very, very difficult to choose one mid-ground or one ground. From tenants, we heard heartbreaking stories on how really they need help with rent even before increases. They need help now. They shared with us unintended consequences of payment plans and how it's great that they have payment plans, but in addition to rent, they really cannot pay their rent and a payment plan that it's in action. They really shared that they needed long-term supports. In the past, rental assistance programs used to provide occasional assistance, twice a year perhaps. Right now, rental assistance programs get calls every month for ongoing rent. Even from low-income housing providers, if you recall, City Council provided assistance to Imagine Housing, and we were able back in April to bring to date all their overdue rent. So in April they had no overdue rent. As of this month, 25% of the Imagine Housing units are all have overdue rent. So it's a long and persistent problem. Again, from landlords as well, they've been, as we heard again tonight, they have been affected by inflation, by the pandemic. They have operational costs, health insurance costs, labor costs that they need to make ends meet on their end. And they also have properties outside of Issaquah. And so if they have properties in 4 cities that are close to one another, and therefore they need to keep up with 4 jurisdictions with 4 different rules, that just causes additional burden on their staff and also increases their staff and costs, right? Because now they need to have more staff and more resources to keep up with all of that. So I'm preaching to the choir. I know that you're well-versed and you know all the realities. So I'm going to move on to just provide a brief overview of what was discussed at the Council Services and Safety and Parks Committee meeting in June and July. We heard from the council members that we needed to look for regional options and not act as a singular entity. I know that council members wanted to hear from other jurisdictions, address legal aspects. We had Rachel in attendance in July as well. And then we received a recommendation to return to City Council with an ordinance for possible consideration. So that's why we are here tonight. And then before I'm gonna hand it over to Rachel, just wanted to provide a brief overview of what have other jurisdictions done. In the past, in the last couple of years, we had jurisdictions like Auburn, Kenmore, Seattle, and unincorporated King County take some actions. And then here on the east side, 2 of the arch jurisdictions, Redmond and Kirkland, took action. As of now, we don't have information on any other jurisdictions that are about to take action or preparing anything in particular. And so with that, I'm gonna invite Rachel to walk us through the ordinance. Thank you so much, Rachel, for being here. Thank you, council members.
Thank you, Monica. Hi, good evening, everyone. Rachel Turpin, City Attorney. The proposed ordinance before you this evening, as Monica has already briefly highlighted, was written at the direction of the Services, Safety, and Parks Committee, and it enacts or would enact one of the 3 recommendations of the Arch Board made earlier this summer. That specific recommendation is for a greater notice period for tenants of rent increases than what is set forth in state law, which is 60 days. So this would increase the notice for residential rent increases from 60 days to 120 days when the increase exceeds 3%, There's a carve out for subsidized tenancies, which is because we didn't want to run afoul of various state and federal laws in particular that we could be preempted by. Those already have very onerous procedures for how you do rent increases for those, but it would apply to all other residential tenancies. And then of course it also provides for severability, and it would not go into effect for 30 days because it is subject to referendum. We can go to the next slide now. So that's really all there is to it. It's a pretty basic ordinance. It's very similar to the one that the city of Kirkland adopted. And it's quite similar to what Redmond has, except for I believe that Redmond also adopted more of the Arch Board recommendations. So the options before the council this evening are to adopt the ordinance as presented or to make further modifications. You could not adopt the ordinance, or you could direct the administration to consider a different approach, or perhaps send it back to committee for further evaluation and discussion. And our recommendation here would be to adopt the proposed ordinance as written. It provides what we believe is a mid-ground between the various sides that Monica went over here. It's not as extreme as what Arch had recommended overall, but it would provide a little bit more notice to tenants to help them out with the planning and the various issues that were brought up this evening. If you have any questions, please let us know. Oh, and then once again, it takes effect in 30 days. And I would say also that along those lines, it wouldn't take effect for certain for leases that were already in effect until the end of that lease term, because we didn't want to run afoul of any rent control restrictions. So there'll be just a small time where we can't get to those, but it'll go into effect essentially as early as it possibly can.
Thank you, Rachel. Council questions? Deputy Council President?
Thanks. Two quick ones. Thank you for all the detailed work that all the human services staff and yourself, Monica, have done. Of course, you, Rachel, too. Thank you for all the detailed work that you've put into this. A couple of quick questions. First, so we don't have any sense of what Bellevue is going to do. We have no clue. Is that correct?
No, at this point, we don't. Go for it, Rachel.
I did speak to the Bellevue City Attorney today, and they have not, their council has not taken this up for consideration yet. So they don't know what they're going to do because they haven't really discussed it. They have no imminent plans to consider any of these. It's my understanding.
Okay, thank you. And I guess to Monica, do we have any unspent rental assistance funds that are sitting somewhere in an account waiting to be used?
So from the $500,000 that most recently City Council allocated, of those $350,000 were allocated to HopeLink. Those were spent. And up to $150,000 were allocated to Imagine Housing. Of those, they spent about $106,000 under the contract requirement. So, yeah, money spent, yeah.
Councilmember Mertz?
No, I'm just waiting to make a motion.
Oh, well, no other microphones up. Go ahead and make a motion.
Thanks. I move to adopt ordinance number
2986.
Tenant protections, increasing notice for residential rent increases greater than 3%, providing for severability and establishing an effective date.
I second that motion.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Councilmember Mertz?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So a great question was asked by the public. What problem are you trying to solve? And that's at the heart of how at least the committee parsed the Arch recommendations that were in front of us. Some of those recommendations may or may not have merit. They're not related to the current housing affordability issue that's in front of us. One particular issue is, or at least it was in our opinion in committee, which is with housing being so tight and so expensive right now, that the impact of increases in rent, if somebody can no longer afford to live where they're living, they need more time to be able to find alternative housing with the market the way that it is right now. We noted that, at the time, this going to 120 days had been enacted already by Auburn for amounts greater than 5%, Kenmore for amounts greater than 3%. Seattle, of course, which is, the big bad that everybody wants to quote as an example of reckless policy. But, Auburn, Kenmore, our neighbors in unincorporated King County are already at 120 days for amounts larger than 3%. We were told that one of the things that's important for landlords is consistency across adjacent areas. This provides for that, with the news that Redmond and Kirkland have adopted this as well. So, we think this is addressing the one issue in the ARCH proposal that does relate directly to the market and the fact that the market has gotten so expensive. So that's why I'm moved this motion this evening, and that's why I support it, and that's why I hope my fellow council members will too as well. Thank you.
Additional comments? Barb? Oh, sorry, Councilmember Duchamp.
See if I can turn my microphone on. So first of all, thanks to all the many tenants and landlords who made comments. This has been an issue that we've received more comments on than we've received on anything else in a long time. I wanted to talk about the clarifications that I would like to make about this ordinance, because housing is such a sensitive issue, and we've had so many different ordinances and changes at the state level. I noticed in the comments that there was a lot of conflation of different issues. So I thought, let's just talk about exactly what this ordinance is about. This ordinance only relates to notification of rent increases for renters who are current in their rent payments or who the landlord otherwise wishes to retain as a tenant. It does not relate to non-payment of rent. It doesn't relate to eviction notices, eviction moratoriums, or eviction actions. It doesn't relate to government regulations that happened during the pandemic. It won't increase paperwork notification requirements already in place for landlords, although it will change the schedule when those notifications go out. It doesn't in any way stop landlords from raising or collecting rents. It even provides a way for landlords and tenants to arrive at a different solution than the one that this ordinance prescribes through mutual written agreement. So to be clear, the rent increase notification will be going to responsible renters who are current on their rent 120 days prior to the end of the lease instead of the 60 days prior to the end of the lease that is currently required. Some renters will receive the rent increase notification and decide that they can absorb the costs. And so this actually doesn't apply to those people who decide that they can afford the rent increase and that it will be part of their family's budget. Some other renters will receive the notification, review their family budget, decide they can't absorb the increase, and they have to begin the search for a new residence. And so this is who we're talking about in terms of the impact of this ordinance. Because the nature of the current retail market, rental market, that search may have a profound impact on their lives, probably, practically speaking, probably driving them out of Issaquah because rents are so high here. If they have to move to a different community and if they have children, they're probably going to have to switch schools or even school districts. Or if their children are young, they're going to have to find new daycare options. And that's another arena where we have a crisis, where there's very few daycare options available. It will increase commute times. It may even require them, especially if they're a service worker, to find a new job. And then they are facing moving expenses, security, and move-in deposits, and all of the things that go along with moving. And so they are asked to do all of that within 60 days. So This ordinance, in my opinion, is a homelessness prevention measure because it gives responsible renters an extra 60 days or 120 days total to make responsible decisions during what may possibly be a complete disruption of their current situation. So I did appreciate the question as well. What problem are we trying to solve? I thought that was an excellent question. Like Councilmember Martz, the ordinance is necessary because renters are finding themselves in a very tough market environment for locating rental opportunities. That's not the fault of landlords. It's not the fault of renters. It's been created by market forces that have multiple causes, many of them well beyond the city's ability to control, including a considerable lack of housing options, period. Landlords need reasonable certainty in this market, but so do tenants. And for the city to ignore the impact of these market forces on 41% of our population, in my opinion, would be disastrous. So the ordinance as proposed is, in my mind, a very minimal action that imposes very little burden on landlords and does provide a measure of relief for those tenants who, looking at their family budgets, decide that they can no longer afford to live where they are living at the current time. So hopefully enough of a relief to prevent even more of our residents from becoming homeless or facing the challenges of homelessness. I will support this ordinance, and I also urge my fellow council members to vote in favor of it as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I wonder if Rachel and Monica could answer a question, because I'm not sure that I heard anything about it in the presentation. This is a City of Issaquah ordinance, so who does enforcement? Who goes to court? What costs are associated with that? And for example, in King County, is the county paying for this dispute if the notice wasn't given, and what are those actual costs?
Good question, Mayor. This really just creates a private cause of action between the landlord and the tenant. So essentially, it provides that any lease agreement that doesn't conform to the city's law is null and void, and therefore the tenant wouldn't have to pay a rent increase that was in violation of that law. And so if a landlord then tried to evict them for that, a court would look at it and say, well, in the City of Issaquah, this is an illegal provision.
Thank you, Rachel. That's super helpful. So there is no expectation of enforcement on city resources.
No.
It's a private contract. Thanks. Russell Joe, or Councilmember Joe.
Thank you. To follow up on that question, as I understand my colleagues, this would only occur when you're at the end of a tenancy, so that if I'm at the end of a tenancy in the apartment that I rent, then if the rent is going up by more than 3%, it's 120 days. And so if I'm hearing you right, one of the things that could happen is that if the landlord fails to give notice, or fails to give notice for a rent increase that's more than 3%, 120 days, or more than 10%, 180 days, and you get to the end of the tenancy, they're on a month-to-month tenancy at that point, and can be put out of that unit with the proper notice on a month-to-month basis. So we're not necessarily, the landlord still would have the ability to get that person out if they wanted to, even under this potential to kind of protect our housing. Is that a fair assessment? Because you're on a month-to-month tenancy at that point.
If they've already gone past the end of their lease.
Yeah, well, what I'm saying is that if you give them a 120-day notice, you're raising rent by 4%, and you get to that time, the tenancy is over at that 120-day point, and then the tenant can go and say, this is an illegal action. The landlord can go ahead and say, okay, that's fine, it's a private action. If you're not willing to pay that amount, we'll just terminate the tenancy and you're out under the normal provisions of the Landlord-Tenant Act. Is that right? I guess my point is, again, what problem are we trying to solve? This seems to increase the tax to the landlord. And if I'm a landlord, and I'm not, I just might increase my rents either by 2.9%, because then I don't have to give a notice, or just stay within the normal 60-day notice on the Landlord-Tenant Act under RCW 5918, or I would give an increase of more than 10%. Since I'm doing 120 anyway, why don't I just do a couple of other months anyway to get that 11%? My point is, or my concern is that we're going to miss that middle, where if we're in an inflationary environment that's 3.6% or whatever, you may get landlords that just go to 10 because they can and have to under the statute, rather than kind of shooting for the middle. So that's one of my concerns. I don't know if there are any comments you have on that rambling portion of my comment.
No, I mean, I think you raise a good point there. That would be a potential ramification.
Yeah.
At the point that it went to a month-to-month lease. What Arch was recommending is really more about provisions for the actual lease agreement itself. So if you went to the point where it had expired and was no longer in effect, then there would be less of a hook for sure.
Yeah, so what we're basically asking is, when my tenancy's up in March, if my landlord's listening, I would prefer the 2.9% rather than 10, but I can understand why they would go to 10 given the way this is set up. The other question I had is I've done a little landlord-tenant actions or law when I was practicing, and when you get to court on some of these actions, you either have to have a tenant that knows the law and can bring it up, or the court has to be aware of what all the King County jurisdictions are doing and have some kind of spreadsheet there that says for Issaquah it's 120 for 3% or 10 or 180 for 10%, and in Duval, which hasn't adopted it yet, it's a different amount along the way. And I know we're trying to get some consistency there, but if I'm sitting as a pro tem judge in court, how am I going to know which law applies? You've got an Issaquah address, but we have a number of Issaquah addresses that are Sammamish. We have a number of Issaquah addresses that are outside the city. How is a judge supposed to know which of these provisions apply in the private action that we're talking about?
You raised a very good point there, Councilmember Joe. It would really be on tenants to bring this up themselves, which would require them to know the law, which is not always the case. So unless the city plans to do extensive outreach to tell folks about this provision, I'm not sure it would have a whole lot of impact.
Okay. And we heard some testimony from a gentleman, I didn't write his name down, I apologize, who was talking about the impact to children, when they have a 60-day notice. It's not enough time really to allow them to make arrangements or find a new place to stay in the district, et cetera, et cetera. And I certainly would be in that situation if my landlord increased my rent by too much. I would have to do that assessment. So I understand that sentiment, certainly. But under 5918-200, you can exclude, a landlord can choose to exclude children from a property and change the conditions of their lease. They would have to give, a 90-day notice, and then they could have the kids not be part of the property if they were impediment to kind of the free flow of apartments out there, so to speak. And so I don't think any landlord would necessarily do that on purpose, but my point is there are some, I don't think we've thought about all the different things that are in the Landlord-Tenant Act that landlords can still use to get around these things or what have you. So I'm a little concerned that we're one of the guinea pigs in this action right now at this point. And so I'm going to make a motion right now because I want to see what Bellevue does with this, I would like us to wait. And so I'm making a motion to table this agenda bill until November 1st to see if Bellevue gives some more time to this. And we'll just see what happens with the vote there. And then I have some other comments if we go on with discussion.
Is there a second? Deputy Council President?
Yeah, I'll second that for the sake of discussion.
Moved and seconded to table. Additional comments?
Actually, a motion to table does not have any discussion associated
It
with it.
just says vote. Oh, I got caught.
If I might add a clarification about the definition of table under Robert's rules, which is to postpone an item because of urgent, immediate business that must be tended to before the item can be discussed. So I would say that in this case, the correct motion would be the motion to postpone, which is a debatable and amendable motion. I'd also like to note that the council meeting in November, the first council meeting in November, is November 7th.
So to a date certain.
Okay.
So I'll go back to the motion maker. Do you want to revise your motion?
And I'm making a motion to postpone until November 7th. And my reason is to wait until Bellevue has adopted, give Bellevue some time to adopt their ordinance. Is that
does the
acceptable to
second agree?
Second?
Sure.
Okay, now we have discussion. Motion maker, did you want to add any more comments before I move around the table?
No, I think I've
Okay.
said enough. Thank you.
I am seeing one microphone up, correct? Okay. Councilmember DiMichele.
I just want to be very clear that this ordinance does not require a 180-day notice for a 10% increase. The Arch proposal, that was a proposal from Arch that is not included in this ordinance. So, I just want to make sure we know what we're voting on here. Thanks.
My apologies. Thank you for the correction.
Deputy Council President?
Thanks. I think that this might be a motion worth considering. I was so convinced I was going to be an easy yes on all of these Arch recommendations when they first came out. But I was hoping that we could spend some time tonight kind of exploring a little deeper some of the policies and the questions of what problem we're trying to solve in particular, because I don't think we've narrowed in on the actual problem that we're trying to, Issaquah specific problem that we're trying to solve quite yet. So I'm feeling personally very moved and compelled by both perspectives of both renters and tenants. And I want to thank all the different renter and or tenants and landlord stakeholders I met with in the weeks heading up to this meeting. There are a lot of considerations, not all of them I think have been mentioned, that are relevant to this particular proposal. I think as policymakers, we need to take that step back and clearly define what the problem exists here in Issaquah using local data. So before we can move forward, and I'm not really sure that we've been able to define that yet. So one way that I'm thinking about this is the number of units behind in rent seems like it could be a good useful way to help us tell that story, to help define the problem, but then also most importantly, because it's data, then we have something to be able to track outcomes in the future and whether or not our policy is being successful and right in keeping people housed and keeping people to be able to have the time to move to another place if 2 months isn't enough time. So a couple questions come to mind then when I think about Issaquah specifically. How are we defining the problem? If we're using that as a metric, how many complexes have back owed rent? For each of those complexes, how many units are behind in rent, and how many compared to the total amount of units that are in a complex? What's the AMI distribution, the area median income distribution of units in need, and is this a problem impacting low income and market rate units in the same way? And if not, perhaps there are targeted solutions to the problems we're trying to solve that might be better. Someone referenced keeping people housed, keeping people from homelessness. That is certainly a worthy goal of government and the city council. And I wonder if maybe by exploring more deeply through data what problem we're trying to solve here in Issaquah, we might be able to find a solution that is tailored specifically to that problem. So, maybe financial assistance for residents in need is the right tool. I don't know. I'm not saying I don't want to do anything. I'm just saying I don't necessarily know what I want to do yet or what we should be compelled to do as public policymakers. So I'm interested in what you all think of that. That's why I seconded Councilmember Joe's motion to wait a while. It would be very interesting to see what the city of Bellevue does too, but I think there are also some data points that we need to explore, getting some more information on that will help guide our decision. And you know what? If we do all that and we come up with the same solution, great. I feel like we've done our due diligence in that, and now we can do what we can to avoid unintended outcomes. We've heard from some people that one unintended outcome could be that because you have to give that notice in 120 days, landlords may be more likely to give that, which might mean that rents might go up. Do I believe that? I don't know yet. It might not happen right away, but I do think that it could be a realistic policy outcome from something like this. So anyways, but if it's another solution, and we find another solution based on the data, then great, we have an Issaquah-focused solution, right? But either way, now we have this benchmark to be able to measure success. So that's kind of the really crux of my argument, is I think that we need to tie this back to data a little bit more. And I'm a little worried we might be adopting a solution too soon. There are a couple other comments that I have based on things that I've heard from staff, but I'll save that for, is there still if this passes, is there still another motion?
There's no other motion, so if you want to throw a few other things on that are kind of related to this motion.
Yeah, okay. A few, other things that I wrote down during public comment and during staff comment. Monica mentioned, you mentioned like heartbreaking stories that you had heard and speaking with landlords and tenants. And one question that comes to mind for me is how are we capturing these kinds of interactions quantitatively as opposed to just qualitatively? And how are we using that to inform decision-making in human services and in policy? Same with the picture Sarah, one of the tenants' rights organization's commenters that came today, talked about, painted a really harrowing picture for us about someone who had been kicked out of their housing into a tent, an elder, I think. And that is a really harrowing story. And if that's happening here in Issaquah, I feel like this council needs to know. And we need to have some quantitative measure of whether or not that's happening frequently, so we can, start to think up policy. I feel like I'm rambling. Anyways, you know what I'm saying about that? I think one of the bigger problems here in Issaquah in particular too is that the barrier to entry for people who want to rent a home is so high. Even me personally, this is very personal to me because as of just a few months ago, I'm not in the rental market anymore, but I was here in Issaquah. And you would have to put up 3 months rent, and your salary, your monthly salary would have to be many times what the monthly rent is for that. It's impossible for me moving back to my hometown. So I feel like that is also a very important policy discussion that we need to have as a council, as well as how are we helping creating a lower barrier for people to enter the rental housing market in the first place. And I think that the committee did discuss that a little bit too, but maybe it's time for us to get a little bit more in depth in that. Also, what we heard from our city attorney too, that unless we have like a really deep amount of engagement with the community about this particular policy, we might not have as great of impact as we intend, is a little bit of a red flag to me too. And I think gets me thinking about, well, then what are the policy solutions that would have a great impact, right? We want to have great impact with our policies. So anyways, just some general thoughts that I had as well. I'm sorry for rambling.
Thank you, Deputy Council President. Council President, there are 3 more people that would like to speak, but you have not spoken yet. So I wonder if you want an opportunity, or should I just go to the 3 that have indicated they desire to speak?
I'm willing to wait. Thank you.
Great. I think it's Councilmember Martz, Councilmember Hunt, Councilmember DiMichele.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I don't see waiting for Bellevue would do if we have Auburn, Kenmore, Seattle, Redmond, Kirkland, and unincorporated King County already on board. I don't know what Bellevue would add to the conversation that hasn't already been addressed by a number of jurisdictions in King County. You know, the fact that Agenda Bill 8451 isn't about evictions or financial aid or homelessness is a fact, and in fact is, I think, an argument in simplicity and clarity around what we're considering doing this evening. I would be very nervous about trying to pack in a bunch of other stuff into AB 8451. I think there is an argument that some of the other sort of social justice related issues might in fact be at odds with some of the financial and market cost issues. And for me, as someone who is particularly concerned about the market, the affordability of this area, it to me would be unfortunate if AB 8451 became a whole bunch of stuff, including things that maybe would make it more challenging for affordability. So I would encourage the idea that if people want to talk about evictions and financial aid and homelessness, it's a different conversation than AB 8451 is right now, and there's nothing to prevent us from having that conversation on a different bill that's AB whatever. And you know, I would welcome having that conversation, but I think it's a different conversation than the bill that's in front of us tonight. So I am not going to support the motion to postpone. Thank you.
Thanks. And Councilman Martz, I would add too, just for those that are viewing or here this evening, we are not the only jurisdiction that deals with this. There are state levers to pull, there are county levers to pull. And so while it is a multifaceted problem, we are not the only solution. We may have a few things on our plate that we can do. Councilmember Hunt.
Thank you. I will not be supporting the motion to postpone, and I will be supporting, should we get to it, the original ordinance regarding the notice for increases. I think we have the data we need to make this decision tonight on this ordinance. We know that Issaquah is not immune to the housing affordability issues in our region. In fact, Seattle Met recently reported on August 5th that we have the highest median two-bedroom rent on the Eastside, and we had a year-over-year rent growth of 17.6%. That's expected to increase. That's one of the main contextual pieces in the ARCH recommendation, why they're making these recommendations in the first place. These increases are here already. They're going to continue. They're going to continue whether or not we take action on this evening. And this is a real challenge for people. It has a real impact on their day-to-day lives. As was stated in a letter we received from Eastside for All, tenant protections recommended by ARCH, they're insufficient to achieve the stability our communities need, but they will allow some renters to adjust to the market and remain in their communities, and I think that can mean the world of difference to folks. As far as the problem that we're trying to solve, I believe that it is economic displacement, meaning that you are priced out of your community, and one extreme end of that displacement can be homelessness, but there's many other outcomes, and I don't expect that we would actually even be able to track that, because if you are priced out, you go try to find somewhere else and you're priced out again, ultimately that could lead to homelessness. But the fact is, I think, you know, we're trying to soften the blow of these of this rent and to soften the blow of economic displacement, and for some people this could make a difference. So it doesn't solve the problem. I think we know that there's a problem, at least I sure feel confident that. As far as the Issaquah specific approach, I have a counter to that, which is in the ARCH letter. It says the executive board finds that there's shared interest of ARCH member jurisdictions to advance common policies in promoting and preserving housing affordability and stability, including policies establishing certain legal protections for tenants. So I think the simplicity, there's an importance in the simplicity in targeting, and there's also a simplicity and a real importance in being consistent across jurisdictions. If we have Kenmore, Redmond, Kirkland, and our adjacent community, unincorporated King County, there's an importance of not doing our very own thing and being specific. We heard that actually from both landlords and it's in the Arch letter, as well as in our staff presentation this evening, that consistency is really important to all members involved. So I don't support postponing. I agree with Councilmember Martz. I don't see that Bellevue is the important deciding factor here. I think we've seen neighboring jurisdictions take this action, and I think we specifically have higher rent increases than all of the other East Side cities, and we should take this action as well.
Councilmember DiMichele?
Thank you. I want to thank Councilmember Joe and Councilmember Hall for their comments, because this is a really, really complex issue, and there are so many threads, and you just almost don't know where to reach out and pull a thread so that we can solve it. And I don't think it's ever going to be one thing that will solve it. This ordinance is a very, in my opinion, a very, very modest action that will help some people to make better arrangements for their lives. And in that case, it could be a huge impact, especially if there are children involved. And so let's just take this very simple action and then deal with the complexities that are all around us and are really difficult to get our hands around. I really appreciate the comments about, we have state regulations, we have county regulations, we have federal regulations that we all have to comply with and that we have to think about, and our actions have to be within those parameters. And so we could embark on a very, very long conversation about where we're going to go. But there are people right now who are hurting and they need action now. And so I will not support the postponement either. I believe that we need to act tonight. Thank you.
Council President?
Thank you. One of the reasons I wanted to wait is because I've just been spending this time listening, and you all I love having you as my colleagues here because there are so many compelling arguments. I also have spent the last several weeks listening to community members and associations and everything. So I came into tonight undecided, and thus I listen. I think my reason for potentially wanting to wait would be in order to consider the other two items that Arch proposed. But that isn't ultimately what this proposal to postpone was about. And so for that reason, I cannot support it. I think we are better off potentially taking action tonight, and then there is nothing that would stop us from having another conversation on some of these other items that we've talked about, including potentially the two other proposed items from Arch, considering the other communities have adopted those as well. And one of my concerns is trying to stay with a regional approach as much as possible, because homelessness and housing prices are not a local issue. They are a regional, state, and national issue. So I won't be supporting this delay.
Everybody has had a chance to talk to the motion, and so we can go ahead and vote on it if you will still want to keep it on the table. Councilmember Joe, get the vote on the record.
I would like to vote on the record. Thank you.
Thanks. So it's been moved and seconded to postpone voting on the ordinance till November 7th. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Those opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
That fails 4-2. And we've made the main, Councilmember Martz made the main motion. Is there any more discussion on the main motion? Councilmember Hunt.
Thank you. I did want to make, I wanted to give a heads up that I would like to make a motion after this, which is somewhat unusual, but in this case, I think that we have new information since the Services, Safety, and Parks Committee meeting, especially regarding Redmond, who adopted all three of the Arch recommendations. And I would like our council to consider those as well as potentially other actions that cities take in the next couple of months, since it does seem that there's new information just between the time we had that Services, Safety, and Parks meeting and today. As I said earlier, I think it's very important what our neighboring cities are doing. I think this is important for consistency for tenants, but also for the landlords and to have predictability and that consistency across jurisdictions. So I would be interested in looking at those other two ARCH recommendations for that reason after some time had passed. And so I would like to make that motion after we vote on this motion. And then the one other reason I wanted to speak, I wanted to do that is because to me, I spoke earlier about the economic displacement, and to me, one of the other pieces of that is if you have a rental increase, you go through the exercise of trying to figure out if you can.
Councilmember Hunt, can I just check in with the clerk? So we're talking about one item tonight, but you would like to take an action afterwards on several other items. It sounds like you have rationale for doing that. Do you want to save that till you do that motion and find out if the rest of the council is like in agreement with it?
I can, but it relates to this motion, so.
It relates to the 120 days.
It relates to the 120
Okay.
days, and I will wrap it up. So 120 days, if you make the decision, then you have to find a new place to live. And so if we're trying to solve the problem with economic displacement, it seems to me we should also look at the move-in piece. So that concludes my comments. Thank you.
Thanks. Any other comments? Councilmember Joe, is that up? Yes. It is up.
No, thank you. Okay, so with respect to the motion on the table then, I'm concerned that we are, in essence, increasing the cost to provide rental units to our community. From my point of view, as I sit here, we have two main kind of challenges right now with the housing environment. We would like to increase the supply of housing, and we'd like to keep prices reasonable, as I'm hearing the discussion tonight. And by increasing the supply of housing, we want a wide range of housing types. So that means apartments, single-family homes, condos, triplexes, duplexes, et cetera. If we tax apartments more, in other words, by making it more expensive to provide that housing, as our landlords have to have the uncertainty of trying to look out 120 days and deciding whether to go 2.9% so they don't have to abide by the law, or go 4 or 6% just to cover potential problems, that puts more uncertainty into their business model and thereby increases the cost of housing overall, as I think of the situation. And so we might end up getting, reducing the supply of apartments in our city because we're taxing apartments more than we're taxing condos or other house types. And so what can happen is under 5918.200 2B, landlords have the option of giving 120 days notice and changing from apartments to condos. And so at that point, the people that are occupying those units can either move out or buy the condo. Thereby, we've lost apartments, potentially, and we've also lost the ability for people to stay in those units because they're no longer month-to-month apartments or apartments under a lease, but they're now a condo that sells for $600,000 or $800,000. And so there again, we've reduced the supply of apartments and potentially increased the supply of housing, or asked if they're a business person that just has one house that they're renting, they may take that off the rental market because it's just too onerous to have that unit and go ahead and sell it off as a single family unit or convert it over to some other use. And so I'm concerned that by taxing apartments in this way, we're going to be reducing the supply and potentially having price increases that will be over 3% just because the landlord doesn't know what the future is going to hold. And if they, don't think that it's going to be 2.9%, which, current inflation doesn't necessarily bear that out, they're going to go to 4 or 6, which could be higher than the actual rate that they would set it, thereby increasing the cost of housing to the renter as well. And then, of course, the last point is, as we make the change, it's difficult to ask the landlord to have that provision in there, and we're putting the onus on the renter to enforce that if there's a private action. So as a result, I'll be voting against this agenda bill this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Mertz?
I would just like to remind everyone that we actually have a policy to mitigate, offset the deterrence to condominium construction. And so if in fact that this wouldn't, if this resulted in some apartments being converted to condominiums, that's not an obvious negative, insofar as we have long recognized in our policy that there's an insufficient number of condominiums in the city of Issaquah. Thank you.
Deputy Council President, before I go back to you, Councilmember Joe.
Thanks. I really, really want to get to yes, but I just feel like the threshold, data threshold, and understanding what the actual problem here in Issaquah just hasn't been met for me. I feel really bad that I haven't been able to get there, and some of you have. I'm a little jealous, but I guess a couple things come to mind. You know, it's been described that we have the highest overall rent on the east side here in Issaquah, which was a shocking article and crazy. 17.6, is that what it was? Definitely telling that there is a need for a market intervention, but I'm not necessarily sure that that alone is justification for public policy. As public policymakers, I feel like it's important for then us to ask, okay, what's the outcome of that? What's happening now that rent is going up by 17.6%? Are people exiting in droves? Is it creating a problem that can be documented that we need, as public policymakers, need to address? So I guess I'm having some trouble with that. I think but on the same time, the economic displacement argument was a good one. Displacement argument was a really good one. Same with valuing consistency. That's also a good one across the region when it comes to what this proposal is for, which is for when you move out and want to go somewhere else, so that you have the time to be able to look for that. And if other jurisdictions have the similar policy, then you're always safe when you're in a particular region. That's compelling to me too, but I just personally feel like I would have liked us to do a little bit more in terms of data gathering on what the problem is, so we could show our homework a little bit. I don't think it's a bad policy. I think it's fine, and it sounds like it's probably going to pass tonight. I'll just be voting no simply because I think we could have done a little bit more to show our work on this particular one. But again, thank you very much to everyone who's put their thought, effort, and time into this policy.
Anyone else before I go back to Councilmember Joe? Oh, Councilmember Joe, you're done? Okay. Any other final comments before we go to the vote? Okay. If there's no further discussion, the motion before council is to adopt ordinance number 2986, tenant protections, increasing notice for residential rent increases greater than 3%, providing for severability and establishing an effective date. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
That passes 4-2. And the next item of business this evening is, oh, sorry. Oh, that's right. Councilmember Hunt.
Thank you. I would like to move to direct the Services, Safety, and Parks Committee to make recommendations to the full council regarding ARCH recommendations regarding late fees and move-in fees on or before November 15th of 2022.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded. Councilmember Hunt.
Yes, thank you. I started speaking a little bit because I feel that this is connected to the last ordinance on my rationale for this. But really, the main factor is that we've seen other cities in Arch adopt these recommendations recently. I think we potentially will also know what Bellevue does, maybe, but we will at least have a chance to look at what Redmond did, for example. I actually watched their meeting, and they went into a lot of detail about the rationale for the move-in fees and the late fee caps. And so I think if we look closely at what other cities do, that will help us consider if we want to align with our neighboring jurisdictions, which again, we heard from our Issaquah survey of landlords that consistency with neighboring jurisdictions was important. So I want us to consider what our neighboring cities are doing. And I also think that we should consider these because we're one of the cities within Arch, and Arch recommended all 3 of these. And I absolutely was supportive of the specific one that Services, Safety, and Parks put forward. At the time in that meeting, it was referenced that we would be leading, but now we have seen what some other cities have done, and so now it's sort of, should we align? And so I think that dynamic has changed. And lastly, I do believe there are rationales for those other 2 that are those other 2 Arch recommendations that are very similar to the rationale, at least in my mind, for the notice of rent increase. Specifically, if you are not able to pay the rent increase, you come to that conclusion, you have more time to come to that conclusion with the ordinance we just adopted. Then if you were able to find a place within Issaquah that you could stay within your community, then you avoid all of those really negative impacts of economic displacement, which again includes having to pull your children out of school, putting them in a new school, having to find a new job potentially, and being disconnected from the community, which has all kinds of ripple effects and I think ultimately affects us all. So that's the problem that I think we're all trying to solve, and I would like us to look again in a couple of months at what our neighboring communities are doing to address this. And sending it to Services and Safety and Parks, because that is our current process for doing this. And I was remiss to not say earlier that I thought Services, Safety, and Parks did a really excellent job parsing what cities were doing at the time, but now we have new information. So I would like the benefit of that conversation again.
Councilmember Martz?
I think maybe Councilmember DiMichele had her mic up before
Councilmember
me.
DiMichele?
Thank you. I was one of the council members on the Safety, Services, and Parks Committee that was not in favor of moving those 2 forward. Listening tonight, I have come to the conclusion that I would like to reconsider. However, I still have issues with those 2 proposals in that I did not think that they actually solved, to Councilmember Hall's point, that they actually solved the problem. And so I'm hoping that if SIP does do a review, that we could consider other wording or other solutions. I'm looking at the chair of the group. So I would hope that we wouldn't be bounded by just the Arch proposals, because the proposals as presented, in my opinion, were vague and possible triggers for backlash, and might in fact increase the problem rather than decrease the problem. So I would hope that we get out of the box of those Arch proposals and look at possible other wording or decisions that we could make related to move-in costs, which tonight, the $7,500, who has $7,500? Well, some people do, but what ordinary citizen has $7,500 to move in? That just seems like an impossible barrier for so many people to overcome. And I think it is something that we need to reconsider. So thank you.
Councilmember Mertz?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm tempted to just say mega dittos, but because I'm the chair of the committee, I'll talk a little more. I am certainly not opposed to a conversation. We clearly heard tonight there's a lot of people in the community for whom this is a really big issue. There's also a lot of concern among rental property owners, which is one of the reasons why we parsed the original bill the way we did. I will need help from the administration on this one. You know, in terms of understanding a recommendation from the administration on the relationship between affordability and some of these regulatory issues. You know, I ran for council in 2009 on workforce housing and living wage jobs, and every 4 years I say workforce housing and living wage jobs, and I get reelected. So I continue to believe that's my core issue. Affordability affects everybody. Evictions, financial assistance, homelessness affects some, and this is one of those classic cases of every political issue comes down to the will of the majority versus the rights of a minority, and how do you parse the line between those two things? Every political issue comes down to that, and so that's what we're looking at here. And so to look at this in committee, what I'm hearing is to look at additional measures around not just the two items that are in the ARCH, but whether the administration can come up with a package of additional things that address some of these. I'm just going to call it evictions, financial assistance, and homelessness, and call it a bundle. And I think we know what we're talking about there. So I'm going to need assistance on that as a committee, because otherwise, all it'll be is folks in the community that think it's a great idea telling us it's a great idea, and rental owners telling us that it will make housing too expensive, and I won't know how to parse that. So I'm just telling you right now, it's going to be a challenging issue, but I hear it's a big enough issue from what we heard tonight in the community that I'm supportive of having this further conversation, even while, as my fellow council member, having a lot of concerns about how it would play out. Thank you.
Now, I'll just add in, Councilmember Martz, that I have huge concerns about moving forward without significant additional scoping. I think what Councilmember Hall said about not just what problem we're trying to solve, but what are our numbers? What is our need? We have no data. What impact will you have? How will we track the impact? We have no data. We don't even have a way of actually measuring it. So my suggested action would not be to send it back to committee, but to have the committee of the whole scope this out better for us so the administration can present you something that can be measured. Otherwise, this is just stories. This is people telling stories. Fearful stories, good stories, bad stories, but they're all just stories. There's no data here that gives you any measurable impact. And I fear making policy without being able to tell if it's successful is maybe not the best course for us. So I would prefer it would go to the cow and have a significant amount of more vetting. This would be a new area for Issaquah. This is one that we have heard from organizations, but not from residents overall. And it's going to take up a lot of your bandwidth and your time. And so I think it needs a significant, bigger conversation. But the vote on the table is to send it back to committee. So is there anyone else who wants to comment on that? Council President.
Thank you. I think this falls squarely within the committee structure, which we as a council adopted and really need to live with as a concept. The reason for having a committee take this on is to have 3 people who can do deep work while maintaining the committee of the whole as something that we can do work that is overarching across several different areas. So I think I would be in favor of this going back to committee. I think we can look to some of the research that some of the other larger cities have presented as a starting point. I think we do have some data on what the rental number of overdue units and the amount due, some of those that shows the scope of the problem. What we will have to figure out is how we can determine the, what the potential range of impacts are from some kind of a proposal. So I think I'm in favor of it going to committee at this time.
Any other comments before we move to the vote? Deputy Council President?
And just to be clear, it going to committee is the other 2 ARCH recommendations, is that right? So that doesn't necessarily capture other potential solutions that Councilmember Martz mentioned, or this broader discussion on defining the scope and scale of housing insecurity in general in Issaquah, right? It's just the two other ARCH recommendations, or would it be within the purview of the committee to say, we'll consider these, but we also want to have this broader conversation?
I'll reread the motion. So the motion is that I move to direct the Services, Safety, and Parks Committee to make recommendations to the full council regarding the ARCH recommendations regarding late fees and move-in fees on or before November 15th, 2022. So, of course, I will just add, of course, that recommendation could be to do something different, but that is the motion on the table. And I think my main reason for doing this is because we've seen other cities take action within the last couple of months. There may be other cities, and I think we should consider this in committee, what our neighboring ARCH cities are doing. ARCH and our participation in ARCH is based on a regional approach to affordable housing. So, thank you.
Any other comments before we go to the vote? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? That passes 6-0. So we're moving to good of the order. Upcoming council meeting, September 19th, the regular council meeting, and the anticipated agenda items include the 2023-24 budget. This will be the transmittal and the mayor's presentation, amendments to Title 13 and 16 with respect to the Stormwater Manual and Floodplain Code, and the Newport Way Maple to Sunset Improvements Corridor Concept. The next, any other items for good of the order? Council President.
Thank you. I have expressed an interest to attend the American Planning Association Conference in Vancouver, Washington in October with a really great set of items, and I would love for anybody else to be interested in coming down with me. But at this point, I am just asking if there is any objection to the city covering the approximately $1,200 in travel costs for me to attend. And seeing none, I will talk to Tina about that. Thank you.
Any other any other items for good of the order? Seeing none, we'll be moving into executive session. As earlier announced, there will be an executive session held this evening to discuss sale or lease of property. Before we move into, well, can we take the break after we move into executive session? Okay. So as earlier announced, there will be an executive session held this evening to discuss sale or lease of property per RCW 42.30.110(1) and pending potential litigation per RCW 42.30.110(1) These items are expected to take a total of 1 hour and 15 minutes, and no action is anticipated to follow an open session. As a reminder, executive sessions are closed to the public. Oh, I'm changing that to 45 minutes due to the lateness of the hour. So it is expected to take a total of 45 minutes. No action is anticipated to follow an open session. And as a reminder, executive sessions are closed to the public. We will now recess into executive session at 10:03 p.m. And for those participating virtually, anyone who's not part of the closed session will remain in the meeting. You're welcome to stay in the meeting until it's reconvened. And City Clerk, can you move us in? And we'll take a 5-minute break and back around 10:08, 10:10.
I think everybody needs to go to the restroom.